welcome to the channel. If you enjoy captivating stories and intriguing content, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss an update. Also, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I love seeing the amazing places our community comes from. Thanks for being here, and let's dive in. Barings Bank had stood for more than 2 centuries, a stolid pillar of London finance that once financed the Louisiana Purchase and the Napoleonic Wars. By 1992, its wood-paneled boardroom still echoed with old-world confidence, even as the digital age crept in. Into this world walked Nicholas Leeson, a young trader from Watford who spoke softly, worked ferociously, and possessed a grin that could dissolve most questions. Officially, he was dispatched to Singapore to handle low-risk arbitrage trades, buying futures on one exchange and selling matching contracts on another, skimming fractions of a percent in profit. It sounded safe, and perhaps that is why the London partners barely glanced at the reports sliding across their desks. In the humid expanse of the Singapore International Monetary Exchange, Leeson discovered a playground. Thanks to a clerical oddity, he controlled both the trading desk and the back-office settlement team, roles that should have remained stubbornly separate. When small losses emerged, he tucked them into an error account numbered 88888, a sequence considered lucky in Chinese folklore. Each night he promised himself he would square the book tomorrow. Tomorrow kept retreating. The first earthquake struck in July 1993. An errant trade left a gap of £500,000. Leeson masked it in 88888 and doubled down, convinced he could win back the loss before anyone saw the scar. Sometimes he did. The account toggled between red and black, an electronic heartbeat all his own. His managers in London received tidy summaries showing consistent profits, and they rewarded his low-risk genius with larger limits. Soon he was wagering tens of millions, but the calm surface of his reports lulled them into deeper sleep. By late 1994, the hidden deficit swelled above £200 million. Leeson's personal life mirrored the strain. Insomnia, bursts of bravado, whispered reassurances to his wife that everything was under control. Yet in the trading pit he radiated breezy confidence, slapping backs, cracking jokes, masking the dread that gnawed his ribs. Each fresh bet was meant to be the last. Instead, it welded him tighter to the lie. On January 16, 1995, a seismic tremor rattled Kobe, Japan. The deadly earthquake toppled buildings and sent shock waves through Asian markets. Leeson, exposed on a mountain of Nikkei futures, watched prices plunge on flickering screens. Losses cascaded beyond imagination. £50 million, £100 million, £200 million in hours. In a haze of adrenaline, he placed one gargantuan trade, a long straddle that would pay off only if the market reversed violently. It was less a strategy than a plea to fate. Fate declined. The Nikkei drifted lower, calmly indifferent to his prayers. By the month's end, the secret hole in account 88888 had widened to £827 million, twice Barings' available capital. In London, executives finally sensed disquiet. A margin call from Singapore arrived, stark and unmistakable. Phone lines crackled with urgency as managers demanded an explanation. Leeson, voice trembling between charm and terror, insisted the money was safe, merely in transit. Then, on the evening of February 23rd, he slipped out of his apartment, left a note for his wife, "I'm sorry," and boarded a flight to Kuala Lumpur, then on to Frankfurt. In his suitcase lay a few clothes and the impossible hope that distance might muffle consequences. It did not. Back in London, auditors opened the forbidden files. The 88888 account glowed like a flare in the dark, revealing the bank's death sentence. By dawn on February 26, 1995, Barings, the Queen's Bank, the financier of empire, was insolvent. Bankers in dark coats stood outside its grand offices, watching television crews assemble. The Bank of England hunted for a white knight buyer. None emerged. 48 hours later, for the ceremonial price of £1 the Dutch group ING absorbed Barings' husk. As news bulletins rolled, the public struggled to comprehend how a single trader could topple a 233-year-old institution. Investigators pieced together the puzzle: the collapsed barriers between front and back office, the willful blindness of superiors intoxicated by phantom profits, and Leeson's own cocktail of hubris and desperation. Risk controls had existed only on paper. In practice, A charismatic employee with a rogue account and a head start of several time zones could rewrite reality, until reality snapped back. Leeson was arrested in Frankfurt, extradited to Singapore, and sentenced to 6.5 years in Changi prison. Behind high walls and humid air, he survived cancer, read history, and authored a memoir whose simple title, Rogue Trader, entered the global lexicon. Baring's name lingered only on antique share certificates and the reminiscences of former partners who still marveled that the institutions they trusted could be as fragile as men. In the aftermath, banks worldwide erected stricter Chinese walls between trading desks and settlement teams, installed real-time monitoring, and courted a new generation of risk officers. Yet older hands knew that controls, like locks, deter only the casual intruder. True safety depends on the vigilance behind them. Nick Leeson had not invented greed or illusion, only exposed how readily both can metastasize when wrapped in a convincing smile and a string of lucky eights. Tonight, as the markets hum in neon silence and compliance screens blink reassuring green, one might picture a solitary trader in some distant time zone. The lesson from Barings hovers above the keyboards. Invisible, weightless, waiting to be remembered before the next bet clicks into existence. Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities occupied 3 pristine floors of a midtown Manhattan tower, high enough that the city's clamor softened into a hush. Visitors stepping from the elevator first noticed the carpeting, thick as fresh snow, and the subtle hum of servers behind frosted glass. A receptionist offered coffee in porcelain cups, not paper, while discreet security cameras watched every handshake. Everything was calculated to soothe nerves and flatter ambition. Nothing about the place suggested crime. That, of course, was the genius of it. Bernie Madoff himself cultivated the air of a benevolent uncle. Silver-haired, softly spoken, fond of pressed Oxford shirts and self-deprecating jokes about his humble beginnings in Queens. He had chaired the NASDAQ, sat on museum boards, donated generously to hospitals and synagogues. He was the embodiment of respectable wealth, and that aura was his most valuable commodity. New clients rarely saw the trading floor. Why should they? The performance numbers arriving each month were enough. Smooth, positive returns of roughly 1%, rain or shine, dot-com crash or housing bubble. No drama, just quiet growth. For years, skeptics whispered. Competitors muttered that no strategy could be that consistent. A derivatives expert once cornered Bernie at a charity gala and asked how he hedged overnight risk. Bernie smiled, laid a hand on the man's shoulder, and replied, "If you don't understand, then you don't need to." The expert laughed along with the crowd, unwilling to press further. After all, many had placed family fortunes with Madoff. To question him was to question their own judgment. On the 17th floor, away from the marble reception, a small, windowless office held the real engine. There, antiquated IBM AS/400 computers printed trade confirmations on continuous green-white paper. Young clerks in rolled-up sleeves fed envelopes, stamping statements that listed purchases and sales of blue-chip stocks. GE in, IBM out, Pfizer in, DuPont out. Yet the trades existed only on paper. The firm's supposed split-strike conversion strategy was never executed. The clerks were forging an alternate universe, one perforated edge at a time. Money from new investors went to pay earlier ones, the classic Ponzi shuffle, but with a refinement of scale. Foundations, universities, even Holocaust survivors' funds wired millions into an account at JP Morgan Chase, all believing their cash was being transformed into steady, low-volatility gains. In truth, it sat, idle, awaiting the next redemption request. As the pool swelled past 10, 20, 30 billion, Bernie joked to confidants that he could buy a minor league baseball team with the leftover float. They thought he was kidding. Down in Boston, however, a quantitative analyst named Harry Markopoulos was not laughing. He charted Madoff's return stream against market volatility and saw an impossible straight line. Over 9 years, he sent the Securities and Exchange Commission detailed memoranda titled, "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud," complete with equations, probability curves, and a demolition of the alleged option strategy. Each submission landed at the SEC like snow on warm pavement. The agency, understaffed and overawed, interviewed Madoff courteously, then filed the matter under miscellaneous. The end came not from regulators but from gravity. In September 2008, Lehman Brothers collapsed. Credit froze. Investors everywhere fled to cash. Redemption requests hit Madoff's inbox like hailstones on glass. He stalled, wiring a bit here, a bit there, but the tide was relentless. On a raw December morning, he called his two sons into the living room of his penthouse, confessed one big lie, and suggested a bonus payout for loyal employees before everything unraveled. The sons, both executives at the firm yet excluded from the clandestine 17th floor, left in stunned silence and dialed their lawyers. Within 24 hours, federal agents appeared at the apartment door. Bernie greeted them in a monogrammed bathrobe. News bulletins flashed the words, "largest investment fraud in history." Victims crowded hotlines, reciting account numbers like lifelines. In Palm Beach, retirees stared at blank computer screens, realizing golf dues and medical plans were suddenly theoretical. A French aristocrat managing a feeder fund strapped a leash to his dog, walked into Central Park and never returned alive. Charities canceled scholarships. Art dealers canceled orders. The silken web snapped in 1,000 threads. In the courtroom months later, Madoff stood rigid as the judge read a sentence of 150 years. He apologized in a voice drained of charm, yet even then some victims felt a flicker of the old spell. How, they wondered, could the same man who remembered their birthdays now vanish to a cell? The answer lay in a talent rarer than arithmetic, the ability to make people doubt their own doubts. Trustees clawed back billions, tracing wires through Swiss banks, Cayman entities, and feeder funds in Luxembourg. Accounting firms paid settlements, celebrities auctioned yachts, heirs to fortunes downsized to two-bedroom condos. Slowly the ledger balanced between fiction and restitution, though never completely. What mathematicians measured in dollars, victims measured in sleepless nights and severed friendships. Outside the Metropolitan Correctional Center, a winter wind rattled flagpoles. Reporters asked whether Wall Street had learned its lesson. A former SEC examiner shrugged. Regulations would tighten, yes, but memories fade. Fraud, like rust, never sleeps. It only waits for a fresh disguise. Somewhere a new portfolio manager polished a pitch deck promising steady, positive returns in all markets, and prospective clients, longing for certainty, leaned in to listen. In the years that followed, Madoff's name became shorthand for betrayal, his story a cautionary tale told in ethics classes and whispered at cocktail parties. Yet the deeper warning lay not in the man, but in the collective silence that cocooned him. The businessmen who feared losing access, the regulators who feared seeming unsophisticated, the investors who feared missing out. As long as fear trumps curiosity, the silken web can be spun again, quiet, gleaming, and almost irresistible. In 2003, amid the espresso bars and hoodie bravado of Palo Alto, a 19-year-old Stanford dropout named Elizabeth Holmes founded a startup she christened Theranos, a smooth fusion of therapy and diagnosis. She wore black turtlenecks in homage to Jobs, spoke in measured contralto tones, and told anyone who would listen that she had unlocked a medical miracle. A tiny machine no bigger than a microwave, capable of running hundreds of laboratory tests from a single fingerstick of blood. The promise was elegant, almost poetic. No more needles, no more vials, no more waiting. Money fluttered toward the dream like moths to a porch light. Tim Draper wrote the first check. Oracle's Larry Ellison followed. Rupert Murdoch staked $125 million. Former cabinet secretaries and four-star generals filled the boardroom, dazzled less by chemistry than by charisma. Holmes explained that traditional labs were antique factories. Theranos would be the iPod of healthcare. The chorus of agreement grew so loud that dissent sounded impolite. In a windowless basement on Page Mill Road, engineers struggled to translate ambition into circuitry. Microfluidic channels clogged, reagents evaporated, control software threw cryptic errors. Each failure met the same instruction: hide it. Holmes and her boyfriend Sio Ramesh Sunny Balwani enforced secrecy with Silicon Valley zeal. Staff badges unlocked only certain corridors. Emails were watermarked against leaks. Those who asked too many questions were escorted out by security before lunch, their laptops wiped by dusk. Yet the public facade gleamed. Walgreens signed a national rollout, imagining Theranos wellness centers nestled between cosmetics and greeting cards. Holmes appeared on magazine covers beneath headlines heralding the next Steve Jobs. Network anchors toured a demo lab where pristine Edison machines whirred softly, though no patient samples coursed through their veins. Investors saw no audited financials, but the valuation soared past $9 billion, conferring unicorn status and, on paper, making Holmes the youngest self-made female billionaire in history. Behind tinted glass, lab directors confronted a gnawing reality. The Edison analyzer could not deliver most of the 200 tests Holmes advertised. It performed a handful, often unreliably, while the rest were quietly farmed out to conventional Siemens devices hidden in back rooms. To make tiny blood volumes fit large machines, technicians diluted samples, warping results. Quality control flags erupted like fireworks, only to be overridden. Patients received numbers suggesting false cancer markers, phantom pregnancies, imaginary thyroid storms. Some rushed to emergency rooms. Others adjusted medications to dangerous effect, trusting the brand's soothing promise. Whispers escaped the firewall. In 2014, a veteran lab scientist emailed the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, alleging serious deficiencies that threatened public safety. The message ricocheted through bureaucratic channels but landed softly. Regulators scheduled an inspection months out. Theranos prepared polished binders and rerouted inspectors away from problem instruments. Meanwhile, Holmes dazzled a White House summit, promising battlefield diagnostics that would save soldiers' lives. The critical fracture arrived from journalism, not government. John Carreyrou of the Wall Street Journal heard murmurs from disillusioned ex-employees and began cold calling. Holmes dispatched lawyers famous for scorched earth tactics, but Carreyrou's questions multiplied. He located Tyler Schultz, the grandson of board member George Schultz, who had witnessed sample manipulations firsthand. The young whistleblower, trembling, recorded vials mislabeled and devices rebooted in panic. Armed with documents, Carreyrou published his first exposé on October 15, 2015. The article landed like a syringe snapping mid-vein, startling, undeniable, laced with quiet terror. Houston in the 1990s crackled with optimism. Glass towers sprouted beside the freeways, and none gleamed brighter than Enron Center, a blue-white prism rising over Texas Avenue. Inside, a new gospel of asset-light capitalism floated through the air-conditioned hallways. Energy was no longer pipes, tanks, and turbines but ideas, tradable, hedgeable, infinitely reinventable. The preacher of this creed, Jeffrey Skilling, favored rimless glasses and brisk conference room sermons. His mentor, Chairman Ken Lay, provided avuncular smiles and Washington connections. Together they promised to turn a gas pipeline company into a frictionless energy supermarket, where electrons, weather patterns, and broadband capacity could be bought and sold like corn futures. At first the alchemy looked real. Traders on the 6th floor rang brass bells whenever a big deal closed. Ticker symbols for E&E climbed from 30 to 60 to 90, splitting along the way. Skilling stalked the curved trading floor like a general inspecting troops, clapping shoulders, hurling quick math challenges. "What's the NPV if this spark spread narrows by 15%? He'd ask. Correct answers brought stock options. Hesitation invited mockery. One by one, shipping clerks and accountants became paper millionaires. On Friday nights the line at the valet outside the Mercury Room stretched with freshly leased Porsches. But behind the swagger lay a fragile arithmetic. Enron booked revenue the moment it signed a long-term contract, treating projected profits from the next decade as cash in hand today. They called it mark-to-market and framed it as innovation, a stance the auditors at Arthur Andersen tentatively blessed. The practice was legal if used sparingly and honestly. Enron used it for almost everything and shaved honesty thin. The slipperiest numbers flowed from a unit called Enron Broadband Services. Executives claimed fiber optic control that would stream Hollywood films faster than any rival. In press releases they cited deals with Blockbuster and Sony. In reality the network was a patchwork of rented lines and hopeful diagrams. When internal analysts warned that projected traffic was a mirage, Skilling waved them off. "The market's not wrong," he said. "The market is us." To keep Wall Street enchanted, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Fastow assembled a shadow constellation of partnerships codenamed LJM, Raptors, and Jedi. These off-balance sheet vehicles bought underperforming Enron assets. Power barges stuck in a Brazilian port, a fleet of rusty turbines, paying with money borrowed against Enron stock itself. The circular flow disguised losses while propping up share price, which in turn underwrote fresh loans. Fastow pocketed multi-million-dollar management fees as both buyer and seller, a feat he defended as getting creative for shareholders. Seasoned traders noticed hairline fractures. Gas schedules printed by one department bore no relation to volumes reported by another. Plant managers logged phantom maintenance to explain mysteriously low output. Still, quarterly conference calls opened with Lay's buttery reassurance that Enron was a logistics company poised for the 21st century. Analysts, eager to protect lucrative investment banking business, asked only gentle questions. One dissenter, hedge fund manager Jim Chanos, shorted the stock and warned clients that Enron's margins defied the laws of physics. His reports circulated quietly, dismissed as envy. Then the air shifted. In August 2001, Skilling resigned abruptly for personal reasons. He left with $60 million in cashed-out options and a handshake photo on the lobby staircase. Investors felt a chill. That autumn, as morning light slanted across Houston, Vice President Sharon Watkins slipped a memo under Lay's door. It ran 11 single-spaced pages, warning that Fasto structures could implode in a wave of accounting scandals. Lay thanked her, promised an internal review, and booked a charter jet for a weekend charity golf event. October arrived with rain and downgrades. When Enron finally disclosed $1.2 billion in write-offs tied to the Raptors, analysts punched calculators in disbelief. Moody's slashed the company's credit rating. Counterparties demanded extra collateral. On the trading floor, phones rang with margin calls while the brass bell stayed silent. Fasto, sweating under fluorescent lights, assured colleagues that fresh financing lay minutes away. It never arrived. A single question from a Wall Street Journal reporter pierced the smoke. "Can you explain in plain English how you make money?" Enron's media team drafted sentences dense with synergies and scalable platforms, but the spell was broken. Brokers dumped shares. Employees refreshed AOL screens as their 401k, heavy with company stock, shrank in real time. By November, the price fell below $1. Rumors of a white knight merger with Dynegy flickered, then died when Dynegy's accountants glimpsed Enron's books. On December 2, 2001, Enron filed for Chapter 11 protection, the largest bankruptcy in American history at that moment. More than 4,000 Houston employees learned the news from cable television. Severance checks bounced before Christmas lights were strung. In windswept parking lots, ex-engineers scraped the bluey logos off their pickup windows, leaving faint adhesive ghosts. Investigators from the Justice Department and the Securities and Exchange Commission descended with subpoenas. Fasto was first to fold, pleading guilty to fraud and handing over boxes of emails in exchange for a reduced sentence. Anderson, once a titan of public accounting, was indicted for shredding Enron documents. The conviction, later overturned on technical grounds, still dissolved the firm. Skilling fought in court, arguing that complex risk management had been mistaken for deceit. A jury disagreed, convicting him on 19 counts. Lay was found guilty as well but died of a heart attack before sentencing. The mythology of limitless innovation died alongside him, though less quietly. In the aftermath, Congress passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, tightening audit rules and requiring CEOs to certify financial statements under threat of prison. Yet veterans of the case muttered that laws are only words. Vigilance must live in boardrooms and cubicles where pressure to impress the market can erode integrity grain by grain. Today, the tower at 1400 Smith Street bears a different logo, its lobby redesigned in earth tones that whisper prudence. Visitors ride the same elevators where Skilling once plotted broadband dominance, unaware of the ghost company that vanished into spreadsheets and shredded confetti. Outside, the Houston air still smells faintly of crude and optimism, an invitation to try again. Only this time, perhaps, with numbers that survive the harsh light of day. On a mild June morning in 2018, Marcus Braun stepped onto the stage of Munich's Olympiahalle wearing his signature black turtleneck and rimless glasses. Behind him, a cobalt screen projected the Wirecard logo, a lowercase w that promised frictionless digital payments from Manila Street stalls to Manhattan boutiques. Braun's Austrian lilt filled the arena as he declared that cash was dying and that Wirecard would inherit the earth of commerce. Investors applauded, analysts raised price targets. Germany's political class savored the rise of a rare tech champion amid an economy still anchored in steel and automobiles. Wirecard's story sparkled. Founded in 1999 as a scrappy processor for online gambling sites, It had reinvented itself as a global fintech platform, brokering transactions for airlines, retailers, and public transport systems. Revenues raced upward, profits marched in perfect step. By 2018, the firm's market capitalization exceeded that of Deutsche Bank, and it replaced Commerzbank on the prestigious DAX 30 index. Braun, who coded as a hobby and quoted Nietzsche in interviews, insisted the company's secret lay in disciplined risk algorithms and a culture of hypergrowth through integrity. Yet a quieter narrative pulsed beneath the headlines. In a small London office, Financial Times journalist Dan McCrum sifted filings that didn't quite add up. Subsidiaries in the Philippines and Dubai reported explosive earnings but maintained sparse websites and telephone numbers that rang unanswered. McCrum's first exposé, published in early 2015, described curious round-tripping of funds between Wirecard entities, yet German regulators brushed it aside and, remarkably, opened an investigation into him for potential market manipulation. The message to skeptics was blunt: doubt Wirecard at your peril. Inside the company, dissent met thicker walls. A Singapore whistleblower named Pav Gill noticed invoices printed twice, once with a vendor's logo, once with Wirecard's. He raised concerns to legal counsel and soon found himself reassigned to a windowless office with no projects. Another accountant discovered millions routed through a Mauritius partner whose listed directors were taxi drivers. She too was silenced by non-disclosure threats. Senior managers assured staff that discrepancies were mere cultural misunderstandings in far-flung markets. The center of gravity for these profits was a set of third-party acquirers in Southeast Asia. Wirecard told investors that restrictive local regulations forced it to process payments through partners who collected funds, took a thin commission, and remitted the bulk back to Munich. Conveniently, these partners were unaudited, shielded by bank secrecy laws, and, crucially, happy to vouch that hundreds of millions in revenues existed, although the cash itself sat in escrow accounts supposedly held at 2 Philippine banks. Auditors at EY accepted letters confirming the funds, but never obtained original bank statements. A simple phone call might have pierced the illusion. None was placed. Braun explained that time zones and confidentiality rules made direct verification impractical. Meanwhile, Wirecard continued to dazzle the market with quarter after quarter of 30% growth. Its share price traced a skyward line, and German pension funds, starved for yield, loaded up. By autumn 2019, pressure mounted. McCrum published leaked internal spreadsheets showing that transactions attributed to Dubai affiliates did not appear in Visa and MasterCard clearing data. Wirecard hired KPMG to conduct an independent review meant to silence critics once and for all. Instead, KPMG found itself stonewalled. Servers went missing, emails arrived blank, key employees in Manila were on leave. The review concluded inconclusively, but the clouds had darkened. June 2020 delivered the breaking point. EY, preparing the annual audit, demanded definitive proof of the 1.9 billion euros supposedly parked in Philippine escrow. Wirecard's trustee produced new documents, scanned PDFs with faint signatures. EY called the banks directly. Both replied within hours. The accounts did not exist. On June 18, Wirecard issued a terse statement admitting a prevailing likelihood that the cash was fantasy. 24 hours later, Braun resigned, surrendering to police with a black backpack and a rehearsed expression of surprise. Shareholders watched 12 billion euros in market value evaporate in 2 trading sessions. Employees refreshed brokerage apps as retirement savings crumbled. Some wept openly in the glass atrium of headquarters, where a slogan on the wall still read "Success through vision." In Manila, local journalists located the alleged trustee's office, a one-room shop above a fried chicken stall, shuttered and empty save for dusty plastic chairs. The scandal's most mysterious figure, Chief Operating Officer Jan Marsalek, vanished the night Braun quit. Flight records placed him on a private jet to Minsk. From there, rumors trailed into Moscow, then to a villa on the Volga guarded by men with military haircuts. German prosecutors filed an international warrant citing fraud, market manipulation, and embezzlement. Marsalek, once fond of boasting about covert meetings with Libyan warlords, had slipped into the folds of actual espionage, leaving baffled detectives to trace encrypted chats and encrypted banknotes. In the Bundestag, lawmakers summoned regulators to explain how Germany's pride had morphed into Europe's Enron. The Federal Financial Supervisory Authority admitted it had focused more on silencing short sellers than scrutinizing balance sheets. EY partners faced parliamentary grilling over why they had not demanded primary bank confirmation sooner. Their answer, reliance on management representations, sounded curiously fragile after €1.9 billion proved imaginary. Braun now awaits trial in a Munich courthouse, charged with orchestrating a criminal enterprise that inflated revenues by booking phantom sales and faked escrow balances. He maintains that he too was deceived, insisting the rogue was Marsalek, the vanished lieutenant. Former employees whisper that Braun's memory is selective. After all, he approved every major acquisition and routinely urged teams to think bigger, faster. In the sterile aftermath, Wirecard's once gleaming headquarters was sold to a grocery chain, its logo pried from the facade. Yet the deeper lesson hangs unresolved. Sophisticated investors, global auditors, and seasoned regulators can all be lulled by a story that flatters national pride and promises effortless growth. The €1.9 billion never existed, but the hunger to believe in it was entirely real. Some evening soon, perhaps in a startup bar overlooking the Isar River, a new founder will declare that Europe can still out-innovate Silicon Valley if only backers show sufficient faith. Glasses will clink, pitch decks will glide across tablets, and somewhere in a footnote few will read, projected cash flows will rise like mist, ready to dazzle anyone who forgets that numbers too can lie. WorldCom's headquarters sat beside a pine-lined highway in Clinton, Mississippi, a town better known for catfish farms than global telecom. The modest setting suited chief executive Bernard Ebbers, a former high school basketball coach who still spoke in syrupy vowels and wore cowboy boots beneath tailored suits. Reporters nicknamed him the Telecom Cowboy, amused that Wall Street's newest titan hailed from nowhere in particular. Ebbers delighted in the contrast, reminding investors that humility and ambition were not opposites but partners. Ambition, in truth, powered everything. From 1995 onward, WorldCom devoured long-distance rivals with the appetite of a cyclone. MFS, Unet, Brooks Fiber, one target after another, each acquisition announced in a folksy drawl that masked the intricacy of the deals. By 1999, the company carried nearly half of America's internet traffic and had just agreed to merge with the far larger Sprint. On conference calls, Ebbers described a future where voice, data, and video would flow through a single pipe to every home and WorldCom would own the faucet. Yet beneath those visionary slides lay a balance sheet groaning under $30 billion in debt. The dot-com boom had saturated the landscape with unused fiber, pushing bandwidth prices down as fast as WorldCom could lay new cable. Revenue growth slowed. The stock price, once soaring at $60 a share, drifted south of $15. Ebbers, whose personal loans were collateralized by WorldCom shares, felt the ground tilt. Margin calls lurked like dark clouds, threatening not only his fortune but the story he had spun for a decade. Inside a drab office on the third floor, Chief Financial Officer Scott Sullivan opened an Excel workbook nicknamed the Kitchen Sink. It contained a single column titled Prepaid Capacity, a bland phrase that would soon carry billions of invented dollars. The recipe was simple, almost childish. Whenever operating expenses exceeded forecasts, accountants shifted the overage into capital expenditure, labeling routine network maintenance as long-term investment. Capital expenses flowed onto the balance sheet instead of the income statement, producing mysterious profits where losses should have been. Each quarter the amount grew, $771,941,000, $1.3 billion, like weights hidden in a carnival scale. Auditors from Arthur Andersen glanced at the entries but found comfort in Sullivan's calm explanations. The telecom industry was redefining cost categories, new metrics were emerging. No one asked why other carriers, facing the same economics, reported shrinking margins while WorldCom's rose. Analysts, pleased by the steady earnings, issued by recommendations and updated price targets. Ebbers toured investment conferences quoting Corinthians, run in such a way as to win the prize, never mentioning that the prize now depended on creative labeling. In early 2002, a soft-spoken internal auditor named Cynthia Cooper noticed odd journal entries posted in the dead of night. She led a small team through locked filing cabinets and after-hours server logs, piecing together a mosaic of capital releases and line cost transfers. The numbers whispered one message: the company was fabricating profits on an epic scale. Cooper's boss warned her to let it go, but she pressed deeper, working clandestinely until dawn, documenting every adjustment. Meanwhile, Ebers faced his own reckoning. The board, alarmed by the size of his personal loans, now $400 million, asked him to pledge more shares or step aside. The share price, wobbling under recessionary winds, made additional collateral worthless. On April 30, 2002, the board accepted his resignation. Ebers left the building without fanfare, pausing only to hug a security guard who had opened doors for him back in the glory days. Sullivan assured Wall Street that nothing fundamental had changed. Yet within weeks, Cooper finished her secret report and handed it to the new CEO, John Sidgmore. The cover page spelled it out: $3.8 billion in improper accounting entries. Sidgmore phoned the board at midnight, voices crackling down copper lines WorldCom no longer owned. Directors gasped. The figure erased nearly every dime of profit reported since 1999. On June 25, 2002, WorldCom issued a press release so stark it felt surreal. The company would restate earnings, acknowledging billions in expenses that had been misclassified as capital investment. Traders reeled. The stock fell from pennies to fractions of a cent, then was halted altogether. 2 weeks later, WorldCom filed for Chapter 11, at $107 billion in assets, the largest bankruptcy in American history until Enron surpassed it months later. Employees at regional offices packed family photos into cardboard boxes while technicians shut down redundant fiber loops to conserve cash. Pensioners in Jackson stared at account statements wiped of value. Across the Pacific, vendors in Tokyo and Singapore realized receivables were now claim numbers in an unfolding insolvency. The bandwidth revolution continued, but its self-proclaimed leader had been built on ledger smoke. Congress convened emergency hearings. Cooper, hair pulled back, testified about late-night discoveries and whispered threats. Ebers, towering at 6'4", denied wrongdoing, insisting he couldn't spell EBITDA when he started and had always relied on the finance team. Sullivan, cornered by FBI agents, traded cooperation for a lighter sentence, describing meetings where the only agenda item was making the numbers work. He admitted the kitchen sink held $11 billion before the water spilled. A Mississippi jury in 2005 found Ebers guilty of securities fraud and conspiracy. The judge, unmoved by pleas for leniency, imposed 25 years. Sullivan received 5. Cynthia Cooper was awarded Time magazine's Person of the Year, though she later reflected that whistleblowing exacts a cost no plaque can repay. WorldCom re-emerged from bankruptcy as MCI and was eventually absorbed by Verizon, its name erased like chalk after rain. But the echoes linger. Every earnings season, when a CEO assures analysts that short-term turbulence will not mar long-term vision, some listener remembers the telecom cowboy, the pine trees of Clinton, and the silent Excel column where expenses learned to masquerade as assets. In a data center humming beneath Manhattan streets, light pulses through glass strands WorldCom once owned. The photons carry memories as well as information, a reminder that in markets, as in physics, nothing stays hidden forever. The signal eventually reaches daylight, and when it does, even the strongest story breaks like a fiber under too much strain. Silvio Berlusconi's Italy once joked that the peninsula rested on 2 pillars: football and food. In the lush dairy heartland of Parma, a third pillar rose quietly, a company named Parmalat, whose blue and white cartons lined every supermarket refrigerator from Milan to Messina. At its helm stood Callisto Tanzi, a portly businessman with a soft handshake and an avowed love of family values. He founded Parmalat in 1961 with a single pasteurization machine, then married technological flair to television advertising, convincing Italians that ultra-high temperature milk could taste as wholesome as fresh farm fare. By the late 1990s, Parmalat sponsored Formula One cars, owned the Parma Calcio football club, and broadcast its own Christmas specials. Tanzi appeared at ribbon cuttings beside bishops and prime ministers, smiling modestly while reporters called him Il Mago del Latte, the milk wizard. Yet magic, by definition, requires misdirection. Inside Parmalat's mirrored headquarters on Via Emilia Ovest, Chief Financial Officer Fausto Tana tended a labyrinth of offshore entities: Bonlat in the Cayman Islands, Epicurum in Luxembourg, Travel Store in the Netherlands Antilles. These companies were billed as vehicles to support international expansion. In practice, they were sump pits for death. Whenever Parmalat borrowed fresh euros to build a yogurt plant or acquire a Brazilian juice brand, Tana shifted the liability onto an island subsidiary, then recorded a receivable on the parent company's balance sheet as though the money were still safely owed to Parmalat rather than by it. The maneuver disguised obligations while preserving the image of a cash-rich conglomerate. External auditors at Grant Thornton, Italy dutifully rubber-stamped the statements, in part because Tana produced bank confirmations showing billions on deposit at Bank of America's Cayman branch. The letters arrived on impressive letterhead, signed by a Gil White who answered no phone calls. No one insisted on independent verification. The milk wizard's legend wrapped questions in gauzy civic pride. After all, Parmalat carried the Italian flag into foreign supermarkets long dominated by Nestlé and Danone, who wanted to be seen dismantling a national champion. Across the Alps, however, analysts grew uneasy. In 2001, Merrill Lynch issued a research note headlined "Profits but no cash," noting that despite steady earnings, Parmalat's free cash flow was persistently negative and its debt strangely opaque. Tana shrugged off the critique as technical nonsense, and flew to London to charm bond investors with projections of double-digit growth in Latin America. The investors, seduced by coupons of 7 and 8% in an era of meager returns, bought 1.8 billion euros of new notes. Parmalat's total debt now topped 14 billion euros, more than Italy's annual cheese exports, but rating agencies kept investment-grade scores, comforted by those Cayman deposits. The first crack widened at a Paris investor conference in November 2003. A hedge fund analyst, reviewing footnotes, asked how Parmalat could report 3.9 billion euros in cash while paying almost no interest income. Tana chuckled that Caribbean rates were notoriously low. 3 weeks later, Deutsche Bank refused to roll over a maturing 150 million euro loan, demanding proof of liquidity. Tanzi sent couriers racing for new bank confirmations. This time Gil White's signature arrived misaligned, the letterhead slightly blurred. Deutsche's risk team dialed Bank of America directly. The number rang to a fax machine. Within hours a terse email arrived from Charlotte. No such account exists. On December 19, 2003, Parmalat defaulted on a 150 million euro bond. Panic rippled through Italian markets as suppliers, fearing they'd be paid in promises, stopped delivering milk. Supermarket shelves, once stacked high, developed ragged gaps. Employees in factory canteens stared at televisions where prosecutors described a hole of at least 8 billion euros. That estimate doubled within days. By Christmas Eve, magistrates escorted Tanzi from his vacation villa to Milan's San Vittore prison, past reporters shouting, "Dove sono I soldi?" Where is the money? Investigators pried open the offshore maze and found ledgers scribbled with code names. Buco Nero, the black hole, marked any transfer that plugged losses. Travel Store, ostensibly a corporate travel agency, existed only as a P.O. box holding invoices for charter jets Tanzi used to ferry football players and Vatican officials to gala matches. Parmalat had even sold itself fake credit derivatives through a Delaware shell, booking immediate profits under the logic that risk could be neutralized by imagination. The final shortfall, 14.3 billion euros, Europe's largest corporate fraud to date. While auditors and bankers blamed each other for excessive reliance on management representations, ordinary Italians reckoned with practical fallout. 40,000 shareholders, many pensioners from Emilia-Romagna, saw nest eggs evaporate. Dairy farmers who had extended generous payment terms queued at bankruptcy courts, clutching invoices that smelled faintly of sour milk. Parma Calcio, stripped of funding, sold star striker Adrian Muto and slipped toward relegation. A decade of civic pride curdled into embarrassment. In June 2004, Tanzi admitted to magistrates that he had diverted 800 million euros to cover football losses and personal art purchases, including a Gauguin spirited to a Lugano vault. "I wanted to save the group and the city," he murmured, as though the theft were an act of regional patriotism. The court was unmoved. After 4 separate trials, Tanzi received combined sentences exceeding 17 years. Tana, whose spreadsheet sustained the illusion, served 8. Grant Thornton, Italy paid settlements but kept its license. Bank of America hastily updated its verification procedures. A government-appointed administrator dismantled Parmalat, selling the U.S. dairy unit to Dean Foods and spinning off Latin American brands. In 2011, the French giant Lactalis acquired the shrunken core for €3.4 billion, preserving the carton logo but erasing the Tansy dynasty. Today, shoppers still reach for Parmalat milk, unaware that the product comes from a different corporate genome. Each winter, law students study the case and ask how such blatant fabrications survived so long. The cynical answer is that the numbers offered comfort at a time when Italy's economy sagged and global investors yearned for yield. Auditors hesitated to break the spell, regulators deferred to national interest, citizens trusted the familiar taste of breakfast milk. Fraud, like bacteria, thrives in warmth. The milk wizard died in 2022, 2 days before Christmas, his name absent from obituaries outside Italy. Yet in quiet kitchens, parents still pour long-life milk into children's cereal bowls. The liquid looks unchanged, but somewhere in the swirl lies a caution. Always tilt the carton, let the light catch the surface, and ask whether what you see is nourishment, or merely a clever illusion that lasted until the first prudent question was finally asked. In the misty dawn of September 18, 2015, engineers from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency gathered in a Washington briefing room, faces lit by the blue glow of a projector. On the screen pulsed a single sentence: Volkswagen admits to installing defeat device. The words felt unreal, like a translation error, yet the admission came straight from Wolfsburg, signed by lawyers who, after months of mounting evidence, had run out of evasions. The world's largest carmaker had been cheating on emissions tests for nearly a decade, and the confession was about to rupture a century-old reputation. To understand the deception, one must picture the laboratory where it was born. At Volkswagen's research center in the sleepy town of Ereleschen, rows of diesel engines sat on metal stands, their pistons clicking under fluorescent lights. Engineers faced an impossible marketing promise: deliver sprightly performance, exceptional fuel economy, and near-zero nitrogen oxide emissions, targets that clashed like gears without oil. A senior manager issued the instruction in 2006: do not change the sales message. Find a technical solution. The engines, alas, refused to obey physics. Someone proposed software. Modern cars host dozens of control modules. A few extra lines of code, nestled deep in the engine management brain, could detect when a vehicle was undergoing a regulatory test. Steering wheel perfectly still? Driving pattern limited to standardized accelerations? Altitude constant? Then activate full exhaust treatment, injecting chemical urea into the catalytic converter and dialing back torque. On the open road, where customers prized pep and mileage, the software would quietly disengage, spewing up to 40 times the legal limit of pollutants. Management called the scheme a cycle recognition feature. It felt tidy, even elegant, just a hidden switch in an unseen maze of binary. The plan worked too well. Journalists praised Volkswagen's clean diesel lineup as a miracle of Teutonic engineering. Television ads showed children drawing hearts in the exhaust haze while a voiceover purred, "Good. Play. Fun." In dealerships from Munich to Minneapolis, buyers signed contracts, reassured by green logos and tax rebates. Internal reports, stamped for Trollich, celebrated soaring sales curves and bonuses that shimmered ahead like Autobahn mirages. Yet numbers elsewhere twitched. In 2014, a small non-profit lab at West Virginia University, funded by a modest grant from the International Council on Clean Transportation, set out to compare real-world emissions from popular diesel models. Researchers strapped portable analyzers to the tailpipes of a Volkswagen Jetta and Passat and drove from San Diego to Seattle. Data streamed into laptops. Spikes of nitrogen oxide so high the instruments froze. At first they suspected calibration flaws, then road dust, then faulty hoses. None fit. Confused, they published the findings and forwarded them to the California Air Resources Board. CARB investigators reran the tests on dynamometers, where the Volkswagens behaved impeccably. Road tests chaos. Lab tests purity. The inconsistency gnawed. Over 18 months regulators queried Volkswagen more than a dozen times. Each reply arrived polished, citing technical complexities and unique driving profiles. Meanwhile, software teams in Wolfsburg patched the code, trying to hide the deception behind still cleverer subroutines. Engineers joked darkly about Bakestol modus, confession booth mode. The stalemate snapped on August 18, 2015, when CARB officials cornered Volkswagen's emissions compliance chief, Oliver Schmidt, during a routine meeting at a sweltering Los Angeles hotel. Presenting reams of contradictory data, they asked a simple, lethal question: is there a defeat device? Schmidt hesitated, eyes shifting. The silence spoke. Within weeks, Volkswagen's lawyers advised the board that U.S. authorities could prove intentional fraud. The only strategy left was admission. The public revelation detonated across time zones. In Hanover, mechanics watched the news ticker scroll. 11 million vehicles implicated worldwide. In Detroit, VW dealers fielded frantic calls from customers who feared their cars had become rolling crimes. On the Frankfurt Exchange, the stock slid with terminal momentum, erasing 25 billion euros in 2 days. CEO Martin Winterkorn, once hailed as the perfectionist, resigned with a statement that ended, faintly bewildered, "I am not aware of any wrongdoing on my part." Investigations multiplied like cracks in ice. German prosecutors raided company villas at dawn, confiscating laptops whose file names, Action Chicago, Sturgerate least, hinted at long preparation. In the United States, the Justice Department filed criminal indictments citing conspiracy to defraud the public in violation of the Clean Air Act. Engineers exchanged plea deals for testimony. One recalled a meeting where a senior vice president warned, "A failure to deliver will have bloody consequences." The phrase now echoed in courtroom transcripts. Volkswagen set aside 6.7 billion euros, then 16 euros and 20 cents, then ultimately over 30 billion euros to retrofit cars, settle consumer lawsuits, and pay environmental penalties, the largest corporate fine in automotive history. More painful was the intangible toll. A brand built on reliability now wore a tarnish visible even under new wax. In Wolfsburg, assembly robots continued their tireless ballet, but visitors sensed a hush between the clangs, as if the machines themselves understood betrayal. Engineers who had prided themselves on precision now revised software under watchful legal counsel, while compliance officers printed banners reading "Redefine Responsibility." Some wondered aloud how so many talented people, sworn to craftsmanship, slid into deceit. The answer lay perhaps in an equation of pressure and pride. When a marketing slogan hardens into corporate identity, admitting technical limits feels like heresy. The defeat device promised a shortcut back to the ideal, until reality, inexorable, demanded repayment with interest. In quiet suburbs, owners received recall letters inviting them to dealerships for a simple service update. Technicians flashed new code that trimmed torque and mileage, tangible reminders that magic is costly. Some customers shrugged. Others felt a sting each time they turned the key, hearing not the purr of German ingenuity but the whisper of disguised exhaust. Dieselgate, as journalists soon called it, rippled beyond Volkswagen. Regulators across Europe retested rival brands, finding lesser but real manipulations. The scandal accelerated electric vehicle mandates. Cities from Paris to Madrid plotted diesel bans. In an unintended twist, the software trick hastened the very transition it sought to delay. Late at night, along the Mittelland Canal skirting Wolfsburg, barges glide past the floodlit smokestacks of the main plant. Their reflections shimmer, breaking into fragments with each ripple, a fitting metaphor. Reputation, like water, can mirror grandeur, but once disturbed, it requires long, still patience to regain its perfect surface. Billy McFarland first appeared on Manhattan startup radar in 2013, breezing into co-working lofts with a toothy grin and a black metal credit card he called Magnus's. The card's perks were foggy, but the pitch sparkled: exclusive access to private concerts, jets, and after-hours museums. Investors bought the vibe. By 2016, McFarland wanted something bigger, an event that would ignite social feeds and an app that would broker talent bookings for the next decade. He called the venture Fire and enlisted rapper entrepreneur Ja Rule to amplify the blaze. The central stunt would be a music festival on a Bahamian Cay once used as a drug runner's airstrip. McFarland toured the island in a helicopter, noting turquoise water, abandoned huts, and no infrastructure to speak of. Yet a promotional video soon materialized. Supermodels splashing in surf, neon drones spelling FWRE against a crimson sky, bare feet skipping across powder sand. Instagram's algorithm devoured the footage. Influencers posted an identical orange tile with the hashtag #FireFestival, teasing luxury packages that began at $1,200 and topped out with $250,000 artist villas. Tickets sold briskly. trust, once again, was manufactured by aesthetics. When buyers clicked purchase, they imagined foam mattresses beneath billowing canvas, sommelier-curated rows, and charter jets looping from Miami to paradise. Few paused to ask why a brand-new enterprise could conjure, in 4 months, a boutique utopia rivaling Coachella's decade-tested logistics. Behind the haze of filters, the ground crew consisted of a handful of 20-somethings in a Soho loft. A veteran festival producer quit after one meeting, warning McFarland that sewage, security, and staging alone would devour $25 million. McFarland shrugged, "We're a solutions-oriented company." He wired $4 million to lease a sandbar named Great Exuma and promised locals that hundreds of affluent guests would arrive within weeks. Bulldozers carved roads through scrub, coconut palms fell, invoices piled on a folding table staffed by a single bookkeeper. Cash turned scarce. To plug gaps, McFarland emailed investors a deck claiming Spotify and Live Nation partnerships that did not exist. Projected profits soared past $50 million on revenue still hypothetical. He pushed a new pre-festival product, Fire Cash, a wristband payment system that required attendees to preload thousands of non-refundable dollars. "The island will be cashless," the e-blast declared, and tens of millions flowed into Fire's Chase account, instantly spent on last-minute freight charters and a fleet of spring break school buses painted white. Contractors grew anxious. The caterer from Miami demanded a 50% deposit. McFarland wired a small fraction, promising the remainder after our next funding tranche. Inside the New York office, programmers toggled between Slack and Google Flights as investors' reps scheduled surprise visits. One morning, the CFO revised a balance sheet sell from $60 million incoming sponsorship to $0. The deal had never been signed. McFarland barked, "Just move it to future revenue," and headed to a Vogue interview touting Fire as an immersive adventure. April 27, 2017, opening day, arrived with a tropical squall. Guests landing at Exuma Airport expected shuttles with champagne. They found flatbed trucks draped in wet tarps. The luxury villas were disaster relief tents pitched on gravel, mattresses soaked by rain. At dusk, kitchen staff served styrofoam boxes of buttered bread, limp lettuce, and a cheese slice. An image soon tweeted around the planet. Generators failed, portable toilets overflowed. Local security locked the bar. A stray dog padded through piles of branded lanyards. Social media, once Fire's accelerant, became a blowtorch. Videos of crowds huddled at the airstrip under emergency lights went viral within hours. American Airlines agents in Miami listened to distraught festival-goers describe nightmarish scenes that sounded like a war zone extraction. Ja Rule tweeted, "This is not my fault," while McFarland, fingers trembling, begged a private equity firm for an emergency $4 million bridge loan. The firm requested documentation. None survived scrutiny. By morning, Bahamian officials shuttered the site. Buses evacuated guests to the airport. Workers who had built stages and hauled sand were told payroll would arrive next week. It never did. Marion Rawl, who had catered 200 daily meals for crew, drained her life savings to pay her staff when Fire's wire transfer bounced. Back in New York, the FBI's wire fraud squad subpoenaed emails. They found doctored P&L statements inflated by multiples of 10, investor updates claiming coastal luxury villas were 98% finished long after Google Earth images showed barren coral. A month after the fiasco, McFarland began a fresh scam, selling Met Gala tickets and exclusive Beyoncé passes via mass text to the same Fire mailing list. Undercover agents recorded calls in which he boasted of front row seats still available. Act fast. Federal prosecutors moved swiftly. In October 2018, McFarland stood in a Manhattan courtroom, tireless, acknowledging that he had defrauded investors of $26 million and ticket buyers of $2.4 million. The judge, noting a disturbing pattern of deception, imposed a 6-year sentence. Ja Rule was cleared of criminal liability but waded through civil suits. Netflix and Hulu released competing documentaries. Influencers who once flaunted VIP bands posted apologies alongside beach sunsets. Great Exuma shoreline healed quickly. Sea grape shoots covered flattened dunes by Christmas. The debts lingered longer. Rawls' GoFundMe campaign raised $200,000 from sympathetic strangers. Venture capital panels cited fire as a warning about execution risk, though the fraud was more elemental, a belief that marketing alone can conjure reality if broadcast loudly enough. Today, somewhere in a federal prison library, McFarlane sketches plans for a streamlined booking platform he swears will disrupt entertainment once more. Yes, time years to refine the pitch. Out in the digital ether, memes of cheese sandwiches and FEMA tents drift like salty mist, reminding would-be visionaries and eager followers that story without substance is tinder awaiting the smallest spark to become global smoke. A fine sleet hung over La Défense on Friday, January 18, 2008, blurring the mirrored facade of Société Générale's Twin Towers. Inside the Delta Trading Complex, a junior employee named Jerome Kerviel sat at his terminal, hands flat on the keyboard, eyes traveling across a lattice of futures contracts worth tens of billions of euros. The positions were impossible, vaster than the bank's authorized limits, vaster than many sovereign funds, yet they glowed on his screen alone. In the official risk dashboards they were ghosts, cancelled out by fictitious hedges Kerviel had fabricated over months of patient deceit. He was the unlikeliest of rogue traders, a quiet Breton who had joined SOCGen's back office straight from a provincial university, absorbing settlement rules, confirmation cycles, and the small gaps where procedure thins. When he moved to the Delta desk in 2005, colleagues praised his diligence. Managers liked that he spoke little and stayed late. They called him Le Garçon Discret, the discreet boy, never guessing that discretion could shelter audacity. Kerviel's scheme hinged on the bank's own architecture. Each real trade produced a ticket. Each ticket required a matching counter trade or hedge. If a mismatch lingered past noon, alarms clanged. Kerviel learned to feed the system dummy tickets, supposed futures with Deutsche Bank or UBS, that balanced his true bets just long enough to survive overnight reconciliation. At dawn he deleted the phantoms, freeing capacity for new wagers before auditors arrived. The ploy was low-tech, almost pastoral, yet scale turned it nuclear. By Christmas 2007 his hidden exposure on European equity indices topped 50 billion euros, roughly the GDP of Slovakia. The market, indifferent to subterfuge, shifted against him as the subprime crisis seeped across the Atlantic. Kerviel doubled down, then tripled, convinced a rebound lay days away. Instead, the CAC 40 sagged like wet canvas. Unrealized losses silently crossed 1 billion euros, then 2 billion euros. On January 18th, a routine control team queried 3 odd reference numbers on his blotter. Kerviel, pulse throttling, invented a story about a pending hedge with a German fund. The controllers nodded but escalated. By Sunday night, internal investigators unlocked server logs and saw entire forests of cancelled trades sprouting and vanishing in milliseconds. At 1 a.m. Monday, Chief Executive Daniel Boughton convened an emergency meeting in a glass-walled boardroom overlooking the Seine. Risk officers laid out the verdict. SOCGen sat on one of the largest directional positions in history, unhedged and already underwater by billions. If word leaked, counterparties would hammer prices further. The only hope was speed. At dawn on January 21st, while Paris commuters sipped espresso, a secret sell-off began. Traders nicknamed it le déroule, the unwinding, moving chunks of futures through London, Frankfurt, and Chicago in parcels small enough to avoid rumor yet large enough to drain the reservoir before it burst. Global markets were already skittish. SOCGen's silent flood tipped them into panic. The CAC fell 6%, the DAX 7%, the Dow Jones opened to a 465-point plunge. By Thursday evening the Phantom Empire was gone, but not its residue. 4.9 billion euros in realized losses and a stain on the bank's red and black logo. SOCGen disclosed the disaster in a terse press release, blaming a single trader whose unauthorized activity had evaded controls. Journalists sensed scandal but struggled with the scale. Could one mid-level employee really gamble the equivalent of France's annual education budget? Kerviel was detained on a Sunday night, escorted past camera flashes into a gray Peugeot police van. He spoke softly during interrogation, admitting to fabricating hedges but rejecting the label of thief. "I never sought personal gain," he insisted. Indeed, his accounts showed modest bonuses, no villa, no yacht, only a small apartment in Neuilly and train tickets back to Brittany. He portrayed himself as a cog in a culture that worshipped profit yet shrouded risk metrics in talismanic jargon. Push the limits, supervisors said, so he did, further than imagination. SOCGen's leadership framed the narrative differently. A lone wolf breached robust defenses. Yet parliamentary hearings revealed those defenses were porous by design. Compliance teams were downsized to cut costs. Control software flagged anomalies but forwarded them to inboxes nobody checked after dusk. Kerviel had exploited not a glitch but a vacuum, the space where ambition outpaced vigilance. The trial opened in June 2010 beneath the vaulted ceilings of Paris's Palais de Justice. Prosecutors, armed with 44 leverage diagrams and 3,000 pages of chat logs, painted Kerviel as an industrializer of fraud. Defense counsel argued that superiors, thrilled by early profits, had turned a blind eye until losses metastasized. Spectators leaned forward when Kerviel described a manager slapping his back after a €500 million game. "Carry on, you're on fire." The metaphor proved prophetic. The court delivered a thunderous sentence. 5 years, 2 suspended, and an order to repay the entire €4.9 billion, more a gesture than a possibility. Appeals whittled the penalty, but the image endured, a lone traitor dragging a century-old institution to the brink. Kerviel served 5 months, emerging to write memoirs and walk a penitential pilgrimage from Rome to Paris, denouncing the tyranny of finance. SOCGen, meanwhile, raised fresh capital from shareholders still dazed by the speed of demolition. Regulators rewrote the playbook. European banks introduced position caps that refresh in real time, segregation between trading and back-office functions hardened into algorithmic walls, and continuous audit bots combed transactions for patterns resembling Kerviel's deleted hedges. Yet veterans know software is only a century. Complacency is the real adversary. Today, from the esplanade of La Défense, one can still see the glass towers where a quiet Breton once typed phantom codes under fluorescent hush. Office lights wink on at dusk as traders monitor indices that respond to crises born continents away. Somewhere among them may sit another discreet figure, praised for diligence, entrusted with small liberties that could, if unchecked, balloon into catastrophe. The ghost positions of 2008 linger in institutional memory, murmuring a single lesson through Parisian drizzle. Transparency is not a feature of systems but a habit of minds, and habits require constant human upkeep long after the software claims the job is done. A humid dusk settled over Birmingham, Alabama, on September 30, 2002, when HealthSouth's founder and chief executive Richard Scrushy strode into the company gymnasium to reassure employees that rumors of accounting adjustments were nothing more than Wall Street gossip. He wore a navy pinstripe suit instead of his usual golf shirt, clasped the microphone with televangelist poise, and declared that HealthSouth, then America's largest outpatient rehabilitation chain, was clean as a hound's tooth. The crowd applauded. Scrushy flashed his trademark thumbs up. No one guessed that 12 hours earlier he had quietly sold $75 million in stock, the last slice of a fortune built on numbers that did not exist. HealthSouth's ascent had begun in 1984 with a single rehab clinic housed in a defunct Roy Rogers restaurant. Scrushy, a charismatic former respiratory therapist, preached a gospel of cost-effective therapy paired with aggressive acquisition. Within a decade, the company operated 1,900 facilities, from hydrotherapy pools in California to speech therapy rooms in Maine. Analysts called it a Medicare printing press. Reimbursements arrived steadily, margins looked enviable, and management promised 20% annual growth as far as spreadsheets could see. The stock, trading under the Johnny ticker HRC, split 3 times in 4 years. Yet behind the mirrors of HealthSouth's glass headquarters on U.S. Highway 280, Chief Financial Officer Aaron Beam confronted a stubborn ledger. Insurance denials, rising labor costs, and integration pains shrank profit. In 1996, when quarterly earnings missed Wall Street's target by 2 cents, Scrushy summoned Beam to his corner office, where NASCAR trophies lined mahogany shelves. "Fix it," he said. Beam hesitated. Scrushy leaned forward. "We don't disappoint." Beam altered an entry, an extra $46 million of fictitious operating revenue, and the spotlight moved on. What began as a one-off became ritual. Each quarter, Beam and a small circle of lieutenants met in a windowless conference room dubbed The Hole. They compared real earnings to analyst forecasts, noted the gap, then divided it by the number of hospitals. Controllers were told to adjust line items, bad debt reserves, contract service fees, supply expenses, anything that looked plausible. Auditors from Ernst & Young sampled invoices but saw nothing amiss. The manipulations hid in consolidation entries, bland phrases like other current assets, sandwiched between legitimate numbers. By 1999, the false profits totaled $500 million. Beam, sick with ulcers, resigned and was replaced by Weston Smith, an accountant with a soft Tennessee accent who soon found himself at the same moral crossroads. Scrushy gave a familiar ultimatum: make the street. Smith obeyed, expanding the fraud through capital expenditures. Need $50 million in earnings? Reclassify equipment purchases as goodwill on a regional merger. Nobody outside the room would know. As HealthSouth neared $4 billion in revenue, the cumulative overstatement quietly crossed the billion-dollar mark, eclipsing the company's actual equity. Scrushy's public persona flourished. He bought a $4 million Gulfstream jet, hosted a country music television show called Viewpoint, and funded a private zoo where giraffes grazed beside marble fountains. He donated millions to hospitals, churches, and the University of Alabama's football program, securing a seat on the board of trustees. Magazine profiles admired the lunch-pail billionaire, who still coached a Sunday school class. Employees, many earning $12 an hour, found the pageantry opaque yet oddly reassuring. Surely regulators would vet a man so prominent. Regulators, however, were looking elsewhere, specifically at CEO pay disclosures after the Enron and WorldCom implosions. In August 2002, the Securities and Exchange Commission quietly launched Operation Broken Wing, targeting healthcare companies with suspicious margins. Investigator William Owens, a veteran of the FBI's white-collar unit, noted that HealthSouth reported profit margins triple those of its nearest competitor while its cash flow lagged. He subpoenaed Medicare billing data, discovering that reimbursement levels did not match revenue claims. Inside HealthSouth, Weston Smith's conscience frayed. On a late September evening, he met secretly with Owens at a suburban steakhouse, sliding across spreadsheets marked confidential. He detailed a fraud then standing at $2.7 billion, an error bigger than the company's market capitalization. Owens asked for proof. Smith returned days later with a thumb drive containing journal entry logs, complete with user IDs and timestamps. The FBI wired him with a tiny microphone for a final act: capture Scrushy acknowledging the scheme. On September 24, 2002, Smith entered Scrushy's office wearing a fleece vest that masked the transmitter. He explained that auditors were asking questions he could no longer parse. Scrushy's response was brisk: "We'll handle the auditors like always. Stay the course." The recording, later played for a grand jury, captured the metallic clink of Scrushy's golf putter against the floor and 10 audible seconds of silence that prosecutors likened to the breath of complicity. At dawn on March 19, 2003, federal agents raided HealthSouth's headquarters, seizing servers and boxed records labeled "Earnings Guidance." The stock, halted at $3.91, reopened days later at pennies. Employees watched retirement plans shrivel. Therapists who had celebrated patient milestones now coached families on insurance appeals from cubicles darkened by layoffs. 23 executives eventually pleaded guilty, including 5 CFOs. Weston Smith received 27 months for cooperation. Aaron Beam served 3 months and wrote a memoir titled HealthSouth: The Wagon to Disaster. Scrushy alone fought every charge. In a 2005 criminal trial, he hired celebrity lawyer Jim Parkman, who addressed jurors in folksy tones. If Rich was the mastermind, why ain't there a nickel missing from his bank account? The argument, paired with juror fatigue over accounting minutiae, worked. Scrushy was acquitted on all 36 counts, a courtroom twist that stunned analysts. Yet civil justice lingered. In 2009, a separate jury found Scrushy liable for $2.8 billion in damages, the largest civil fraud judgment against a single executive in U.S. history. He served 6 years on an unrelated bribery conviction tied to Alabama's governor and emerged from prison declaring himself blessed and grateful. HealthSouth, rebranded as Encompass Health, now specializes in post-acute care, its financials audited under Sarbanes-Oxley's unforgiving glare. A placard in the renovated lobby reads integrity, accountability, excellence. Visitors pass a bronze sculpture of 2 hands cradling a heartbeat line, unaware that beneath the polished floor once lay a vault of phantom profits. The story circulates at accounting seminars as a caution that every spreadsheet sell is a moral choice. On humid southern evenings, commuters driving down Highway 280 still glimpse the gleaming tower and remember how easily faith in numbers can curdle, like milk left too long in Alabama heat. The red sandstone towers of Wells Fargo Center pierce the Denver skyline like stern sentinels, a fitting symbol for a bank that once outfitted stagecoaches and guarded gold. By 2000, however, its treasure lay not in bullion but in data, millions of customer records pulsing through call center headsets and branch PCs. Executives in San Francisco spoke of a new frontier called cross-sell, the art of persuading each account holder to own 8, 9, 10 separate products. Checking, savings, credit card, mortgage, auto loan, and on it went. 8 is great, read a poster in regional training rooms. Branch managers repeated the mantra until it became catechism. Carrie Tolstedt, head of community banking, enforced the creed with quarterly rankings so granular that a teller in Tucson knew by lunchtime whether she stood above or below peers in Toledo. Prizes glittered, trips to Hawaii, $15,000 bonuses, plaques etched with galloping horses. Yet behind the sparkle lurked quotas as rigid as steel rails. A Maryland branch worker recalled a conference call where a district manager barked, "If you leave here with less than 4 solutions per customer, you're stealing from the bank." Pressure found the cracks. In Phoenix, tellers began opening mock savings accounts for college students who only wanted a debit card. In Des Moines, a personal banker ordered debit cards in the names of elderly customers who had never used email, then sent the plastic to the branch so the metrics registered active. Some staff created pinning events, assigning a random 4-digit PIN so the system logged the card as activated before shredding it. The phantom accounts often carried 1-cent balances, just enough to appear real, then quietly incurred overdraft fees when automatic charges posted for statements or inactivity. By 2011, the internal euphemism for these maneuvers was gaming. Regional audits flagged thousands of suspect accounts, yet upward reports died inside a bureaucracy wired for applause, not alarms. Tolstedt celebrated 53 consecutive quarters of record cross-sell, coining the phrase intersection of trust and convenience. Quarterly earnings calls featured analysts congratulating CEO John Stumpf on industry-leading household penetration. No one asked how an average American family could possibly need 6 credit cards. In Los Angeles, however, City Attorney Mike Feuer received an unusual cluster of complaints. Renters denied apartments because credit checks showed delinquent Wells Fargo credit lines they had never requested. Feuer's consumer protection chief, who subpoenaed 5 years of branch-level records. What emerged looked like a typist's hallucination. Deposit accounts opened at 11:59 p.m., checking accounts closed and reopened the same day, email addresses ending in at wellsfargo.com because real ones were unavailable. Feuer filed suit in September 2013, alleging unlawful, unfair, and fraudulent sales practices. Wells Fargo's response was breezy: isolated misconduct, promptly corrected. Internally, Tolstedt convened town hall meetings reminding employees to do what's right, yet quotas remained. A branch manager from Texas later testified that after voicing concerns, she was labeled negative and placed on a performance improvement plan. Others simply resigned, leaving cubicles plastered with yellow sticky notes enumerating daily targets. 7 credit cards, 5 debit card upgrades, 3 bill pay enrollments. The reckoning arrived courtesy of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, still young and eager to prove relevance. Investigators sampled accounts from 2011 to 2015 and confirmed what whistleblowers had whispered: roughly 2 million unauthorized deposit and credit accounts, 565,000 credit card applications filed without consent, and nearly 500,000 customers enrolled in online bill pay services they never used. Some victims paid late fees or watched credit scores collapse. Others remained blissfully unaware, data points in a spreadsheet of ghost signatures. On September 8, 2016, the CFPB, OCC, and Los Angeles City Attorney announced a combined $185 million penalty, the largest the fledgling agency had yet imposed. Headlines flared: Wells Fargo fined for creating fake accounts. In branch lobbies, customers stared at framed ads promising "together we'll go far" and wondered how far the bank had dragged their trust. Tolstedt retired days later with stock and options initially valued at $125 million. CEO Stump faced Congress in a televised hearing where Senator Elizabeth Warren, voice sharp as Grafton Steel, asked, "Why haven't you resigned?" Stump, sweating behind the witness table, replied that he took full responsibility, then deflected to individual bankers who failed to honor our culture. Lawmakers gasped. Culture, they countered, was exactly the problem. Public outrage snowballed. Branch employees mailed reimbursement checks to wronged customers. The board clawed back $69 million from Stump and $67 million from Tolstedt, reversing decades of banker impunity. Stump resigned that October, marking one of the swiftest downfalls in modern banking. In 2020, the OCC charged Tolstedt with civil penalties. 3 years later, she pleaded guilty to obstructing a bank examination, facing up to 16 months in prison, the first senior Wells Fargo executive to confront jail for the scandal. Inside renovated training centers, new banners read "Earn Trust Every Day," quotas replaced by softer customer relationship goals. Skeptics noted that a culture built over decades rarely sheds its skin overnight. Yet something had shifted. Regulators had shown teeth, employees saw whistleblowers celebrated rather than shunned, and customers began checking their statements with a freshly critical eye. On a winter evening outside the Denver Towers, the bronze stagecoach statue still gleams under halogen lamps, horses frozen mid-gallop. Tourists snap photos, unaware that in nearby filing rooms auditors now trace every new account back to a scanned driver's license and a recorded consent. The signatures at last belong to hands that actually moved a pen. Proof that paper, like trust, must bear real weight if it is to resist the seductive drift of numbers toward fiction. Before the casinos and cruise ships of Nassau, Bahamas, there rose a low-slung glass complex known simply as the campus. Inside, coaters in hoodies drifted past aquariums of coral reef fish, while rescue dogs padded across Persian rugs. At the center of this improbable idol sat Sam Bankman-Fried, barefoot, afro unruly, gazing at 8 monitors stacked like a control tower. He spoke in rapid half-sentences, assuring visitors that his exchange, FTX, was the safest, most transparent way to trade crypto. They believed him because he seemed allergic to pretense. Shorts, a wrinkled t-shirt, a lunch of vegan noodles eaten over spreadsheets worth billions. FTX had launched in 2019 with a clever idea. Let anyone bet on anything from Bitcoin to the outcome of presidential elections, using complex yet user-friendly derivatives. Volumes exploded. Venture funds, desperate for growth stories, poured in $2 billion. The valuation vaulted to $32 billion, crowning Bankman-Fried, SBF, to admirers as the savior who would civilize crypto's Wild West. Magazine covers compared his mop of hair to Einstein's. Lawmakers invited him to testify on Capitol Hill. Between policy sessions, he pledged to give away almost all his fortune under the banner of effective altruism, sprinkling $50 million on pandemic research and climate grants. Virtue and profit appeared to coexist in effortless harmony. Yet harmony hid a labyrinth. Parallel to FTX, SBF controlled Alameda Research, a proprietary trading firm he had founded in a Berkeley studio apartment. Officially, Alameda was a separate customer on the exchange, subject to the same margin rules as everyone else. In practice, code written by a small, secret group granted Alameda a credit line measured in billions and an exemption from automatic liquidation. When trades went sour, losses simply settled into a private corner of FTX's database, invisible to risk dashboards shown to investors. The funding mechanism was even simpler. FTX issued its own token, FTT, and booked the self-created coins as assets on its balance sheet. Alameda pledged those same tokens as collateral to borrow real dollars from FTX. An Ouroboros of leverage, value conjured from a ticker symbol that barely traded beyond the house walls. Auditors, dazzled by spreadsheets full of cryptic wallet addresses, signed off with boilerplate notes about fair presentation. Warnings flickered. In July 2022, a junior developer noticed a line of code that rerouted customer deposits meant for FTX into a North Dimension bank account controlled by Alameda. She flagged the anomaly. A senior engineer replied with a smiley emoji and the words "works as intended." In August, a risk analyst calculated that if FTT fell more than 40%, both FTX and Alameda would face an $8 billion shortfall. The report never left his laptop. SBF reiterated to media outlets that FTX maintained a strict 1:1 reserve for client funds, adding, "We don't lend customer assets, full stop." The match struck on November 2, 2022, when a CoinDesk journalist obtained Alameda's internal balance sheet. Over one-third of its $14 billion in assets was FTT minted by FTX itself. The article summarized the arrangement in a single chilling sentence. The empire is built on a foundation largely made of a token printed out of thin air. Competitors smelled blood. Changpeng Zhao, CEO of Binance and once an early investor in FTX, tweeted that he would sell his firm's entire $500 million stash of FTT due to recent revelations. Traders followed, hammering the price from $22 to $3 in 48 hours. Withdrawal requests hit FTX at a rate of $6 billion per day. On the NASA campus, phone alarms chimed like a fire drill. A compliance officer asked whether they actually had the cash. An engineer muttered, "We're a bit light." SBF sought a deus ex machina. He phoned Zhao, proposing that Binance acquire FTX in exchange for covering the hole. Binance signed a non-binding letter of intent, then opened FTX's books and recoiled. An $8 billion deficit, lax internal controls, and loans to executives for luxury real estate across New Providence Island. Binance walked away within 24 hours, issuing a cryptic statement about corporate due diligence. Investors, customers, and employees realized simultaneously that the money was gone. On November 11, 2022, FTX, Alameda, and more than 100 affiliates filed for Chapter 11 protection in Delaware. John Ray III, the attorney who once untangled Enron, took over as CEO and declared, "Never in my career have I seen such a complete failure of corporate controls." In court filings, he detailed accountants who used QuickBooks for billion-dollar ledgers, expense approvals via emoji, and private keys scribbled on post-it notes. Clients from Kansas teachers to Korean day traders stared at frozen dashboards showing balances they might never reclaim. Venture funds marked stakes to zero. Charities paused programs financed by SBF's promises. On Twitter Spaces, adherents of effective altruism debated how a philosophy of maximizing good could birth such harm. Federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York moved quickly. They charged Bankman-Fried with wire fraud, securities fraud, and campaign finance violations, alleging he had siphoned customer deposits to cover Alameda's losses and to donate more than $70 million to political candidates. Extradited from the Bahamas, SBF appeared in court wearing a navy suit too large for his frame, hair newly cropped, expression dazed but defiant. He pleaded not guilty, blaming a big accounting error, and insisting that with time he could still make customers whole. Former Lieutenants Caroline Ellison and Gary Wong accepted plea deals, admitting they coded the special privileges and knowingly falsified financial statements. Their testimony painted a picture of late-night strategy sessions fueled by stimulants and philosophy podcasts, where ethical knots were sliced by the refrain, "We're doing good with the money." In the aftermath, legislators drafted bills to corral crypto exchanges under bank-style regulation, while Twitter skeptics noted that traditional banks, too, have found creative ways to misplace deposits. The real caution, some argued, lay not in blockchain but in charisma. A young billionaire who slept on beanbags and proclaimed disdain for luxury had proven the perfect vessel for trust. Today the Nassau campus sits quiet, windows tinted against the tropical glare. Local fishermen say the rescue dogs were flown stateside. The reef aquarium lies drained, coral skeletons bleached ivory. In a federal evidence locker, a single hard drive contains wallets whose passphrase may never be recovered, digital relics of a kingdom built and lost in the span of one manic bull market. On evenings when the trade winds rattle the palms, residents swear they can still hear the hum of servers and the staccato clack of a keyboard drafting the next big promise. A reminder that the line between innovation and illusion is often written not in code, but in unchecked conviction. Marcus Braun liked to begin each Munich morning with a lap around the English garden, earbuds pumping a steady metronome of electronic music while ideas for the day's investor calls drifted across his mind. It was 2018 and Wirecard, once a modest payments processor for online casinos, had evolved into the DAX's newest darling. 40-year-old portfolio managers in Frankfurt spoke of its limitless runway, and glossy magazines praised Braun's monk-like focus. The company's headquarters, a mirrored cube near Ascium, seemed to glow with self-confidence. Yet, inside a cramped newsroom in the Financial Times office on the other side of the channel, reporter Dan McCrum stared at a spreadsheet that refused to balance. Revenues from Manila, Jakarta, and Dubai rose in neat, diagonal lines, but the cash flows attached to those revenues zigzagged like a lie detector. Dan's source, a jittery whistleblower known as Eagle, insisted the numbers were fabricated heat, footprints left by transactions that never existed. Dan printed the statements, highlighted the most puzzling entries, and pinned them above his desk, each sheet a silent accusation. While Dan pieced together clues, Braun prepared for the company's annual strategy summit. The boardroom screens displayed a stunning world map in crimson and silver triangles, marking every territory where Wirecard purportedly processed payments. Braun's lieutenant, a silver-haired Austrian named Jan Marsalek, clicked through slides that showed profits doubling, then doubling again. Directors nodded. One whispered, "We're unstoppable." Marsalek, who often charmed them with tales of secret trips to Libya and Moscow, promised even greater things: a digital banking platform that would leapfrog traditional finance. Unbeknownst to those directors, a different audience gathered 30 miles away in a Bavarian safe deposit facility. Two KPMG auditors unlatched a metal briefcase expecting to find physical documents, bank certificates from the Philippines guaranteeing that 1.9 billion euros of client funds rested safely offshore. Instead, the case held only photocopies and an unsigned cover letter. Someone had forgotten, or perhaps refused, to provide originals. The auditors exchanged a single, uneasy glance. Back in London, Dan wrestled with a tactical dilemma: publish now and risk getting sued, or keep digging until every line item was nailed down. He chose patience. Over the next 6 months, he followed the money, if it could be called money, through a thicket of third-party acquirers, obscure entities that supposedly processed credit card payments in regions where Wirecard lacked licenses. Many were registered to co-working spaces. One was nothing more than a dentist's office. When Dan phoned, receptionists answered with confusion, then politely hung up. Meanwhile, Wirecard's share price scaled fresh heights, and Braun scheduled a new bond issue. He paced the 17th floor corridor, hands clasped behind his back, quoting Voltaire to employees about the necessity of daring. The company's PR team flooded social media with images of urban commuters tapping Wirecard-branded wallets, each image suggesting ubiquity. Analysts upgraded their targets. Private investors bragged on message boards that Wirecard was the German Amazon. Spring turned to summer. On a humid June evening, Marsalek sent a text to Braun: "We should meet. Urgent." They convened in the CEO's glass-walled office after hours. Marsalek spoke quickly. KPMG, engaged for a special audit, remained skeptical about those Philippine bank balances. Braun lifted an eyebrow. "Then we'll show them a bank confirmation." Marsalek nodded, but his pale face tightened as he left, as though invisible strands were pulling him in too many directions at once. Across Europe, tiny fissures began to spread. A Singapore-based finance manager resigned, citing ethical concerns. Regulators in BaFin fielded anonymous tips. Hedge fund managers smelled blood and amassed short positions. Wirecard fought back, issuing press releases accusing speculators and journalists of orchestrating a disinformation campaign. Lawyers mailed threats. Still, the share price wobbled only briefly before recovering, proof to believers that the attacks were baseless. The reckoning arrived on an otherwise forgettable Thursday morning. KPMG released its delayed special audit report, a labyrinthine document that nevertheless landed one clear punch. The auditors could not verify the existence of 1.9 billion euros in cash supposedly held in two Filipino banks. Wirecard requested a trading halt, and investors, like children discovering the magician's trapdoor, gasped in unison. When trading resumed, the stock plunged over 70% in a single day. Braun called an emergency board meeting. Outside the headquarters, television crews erected tripods. Inside, directors demanded explanations. Braun suggested wires had been crossed, certificates misplaced, but his voice lacked its usual steel. One director asked, "Could the money simply not be there?" Silence congealed in the room. Then a junior counsel, barely 30, whispered the unspeakable, "We may have to consider insolvency." That night, Marsalek vanished. Phone off, apartment cleared. Rumors placed him in Minsk, Dubai, maybe Moscow. Interpol issued a red notice, yet he remained a ghost, a man who had once boasted of visiting Syrian battlefields for fun. His disappearance only deepened the mystery. Braun, cornered, surrendered to German authorities the next morning. Cameras flashed as officers escorted him to a waiting van. Depositors lined up outside Wirecard Bank, anxious to see whether their savings were safe. Many small merchants, whose payment terminals relied on Wirecard's rails, froze in mid-transaction, receipts curling from printers like question marks. In a modest London flat, Dan McCrum watched the live stream, coffee untouched. The story he had chased for 6 years had at last burst into daylight, but the triumph felt muted, almost solemn. Fraud, he realized, is not a single act but a performance. A careful manipulation of trust performed night after night until the curtain rips. On television, Braun lowered his gaze, hands cuffed, a puppet whose strings had finally tangled. A week later, Wirecard declared insolvency, the first member of Germany's elite DAX index ever to do so. The missing €1.9 billion was written down to zero, described in the administrator's report with a single chilling sentence. The funds were most probably never available. Pension funds absorbed heavy losses, regulators faced parliamentary inquests, and ordinary employees clutched cardboard boxes, their futures as empty as the phantom accounts in Manila. In the end, there were no dramatic confessions, no suitcases stuffed with cash retrieved from secret bunkers. The fraud had thrived not on complexity but on credulity, on the collective willingness to believe that exponential growth could bloom forever without soil or sunlight. When that belief evaporated, so did Wirecard, leaving behind only the echo of electronic music in the English garden and a cautionary tale etched into Europe's financial consciousness. Bernard L. Madoff kept a soft lamp burning in his Manhattan corner office long after most workers vanished into the December cold. 50 floors below, the Christmas lights of the city flickered like a grid of promises, and Wall Street's hum receded to a hush broken only by distant sirens. From the polished corridor one could glimpse him at his desk, rolling a Montblanc pen between his fingers, reviewing statements bound for clients who slept soundly because they believed he was safeguarding their futures. To the public, Bernie was an elder statesman of finance, a former NASDAQ chairman, philanthropist, advisor to regulators. His trading firm, Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, occupied 2 floors in the Lipstick Building. One floor bustled with legitimate market-making, rows of screens, jargon, the erratic percussion of traders hammering keyboards. The other floor, the 14th, was accessible only by a coded door. There, in a low-ceilinged back room dubbed the fridge, a handful of loyal employees printed account statements on an aging IBM machine and fed endless rolls of continuous stationery through dot matrix printers. They called the process cooking, half joke, half confession. Across the East River in Queens, middle-class retirees studied those statements each month. The numbers rose in smooth arcs, rarely dipping, never plunging. Steady as she goes, one widower liked to tell his bowling league, holding up a page that showed an 11% annual return every year, no matter the market weather. Charities, Hollywood producers, European aristocrats, and New York country club friends all received the same reassuring trajectory. To many, Bernie's gift seemed less financial acumen than alchemy. He turned anxiety into serenity, fear into a predictable line of black ink. Yet serenity frayed for a select few. In 2000, Boston money manager Harry Markopolos sat in a cubicle comparing Madoff's claim strategy, split-strike conversion, to the impossible smoothness of his returns. Using simple options math, he concluded the figures defied the most charitable assumptions of volatility. Markopolos compiled an 8-page memo titled, "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud," and carried it to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Investigators listened, nodded, thanked him, and filed the memo away. Back in Midtown, Madoff sensed murmurs but trusted in regulatory inertia and social capital. He attended charity galas, tuxedo impeccable, and fielded gentle questions with a serene smile. "It's a proprietary trading model," he would say, palms slicing the air as though cutting away doubt. Listeners leaned in, flattered by proximity to mystery, then drifted off to the bar content. By late 2007, however, storm clouds gathered. The subprime crisis battered global markets, and panicked investors began pulling cash everywhere except from Madoff. he remained a bright lighthouse. But when the carnage deepened in 2008, redemption requests accelerated. Bernie's scheme, simply using new deposits to pay earlier investors, depended on constant inflow. The fountain was drying up. Each morning he walked the trading floor, white cuffs immaculate, yet the inner rhythm of his heart beat with an irregular thud he could not still. Inside the fridge, Frank DePascali, Bernie's lieutenant, stared at dual monitors tracking withdrawals. "We're cooked, boss," he muttered one evening, voice scarcely above a whisper. Madoff rubbed his temples and proposed wiring funds from European feeders, but those feeders were hearing echoes of the same anxiety back home. DePascali's eyes darted toward a shelf lined with manila folders. Fake trade tickets, forged DDC confirms. Paper armor was useless when the castle treasury was empty. On December 10, 2008, Madoff summoned his two adult sons, Mark and Andrew, to the apartment on East 64th Street. The living room glowed with understated luxury, pale carpets, tasteful art, a menorah in the window. Bernie lowered himself onto a sofa and spoke a sentence that collapsed 3 decades into 9 words. "It's all one big lie, basically a giant Ponzi." The sons were speechless. Hours later, guided by lawyers, they called the FBI. The next morning, Special Agent Theodore Cassioppi stepped from an elevator at the Lipstick Building and found Madoff behind his desk, hands folded. "There is no innocent explanation," Bernie confessed before the agent asked a question. The amount missing, he estimated, was about 50 billion. The figure floated in the room, heavy as lead, unbelievable yet precise. News rocketed across the Atlantic. In Geneva, a private banker stared at his Bloomberg terminal, mouth ajar. In Palm Beach, country club members gathered in clusters, brows knit, as waitstaff cleared untouched breakfasts. On Long Island, foundations that funded scholarships realized they were broke. Some beneficiaries would discover only months later, when tuition invoices arrived and checks bounced. The arrest triggered grief, rage, and a grim cascade of consequences. A French aristocrat connected to a feeder fund took his own life in his Madison Avenue study. A New York widow who had trusted Madoff since she and her late husband sold their garment business, learned she would need to sell the condo purchased for her daughter. Her voice cracked as she told a reporter, "I thought Bernie was family." In federal court, Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 counts. Judge Denny Chin called the fraud extraordinary evil and imposed a 150-year sentence. Bernie stood impassive, a man whose talent for soothing others had finally deserted him. At sentencing, some victims spoke of ruined retirements, others of more abstract wounds, the shattering of faith in discernment and intuition, in the idea that hard work and prudence were protection enough. Even prison could not dispel certain myths. Conspiracy theorists argued Bernie must have hidden billions offshore. Forensic accountants, after years of tracing wires, found nothing but a trail of vanishing digits. The fraud's mechanics were painfully simple. Money went in, money went out, and a printer generated the illusion of growth until redemptions outran deposits. Harry Markopoulos, the whistleblower ignored for nearly a decade, testified before Congress. Holding aloft his original memo, now creased and coffee-stained, he declared, "All of this could have been prevented." Lawmakers shook their heads, chastened, journalists scribbled, cameras flashed. Outside the hearing room, Markopoulos exhaled, feeling neither vindication nor joy, only a dull ache for time lost. From inside Butner Federal Correctional Complex, Madoff wrote occasional letters in a neat hand. He spoke of remorse, of sleepless nights, of cancer consuming him. But the letters could not erase the echo of that soft lamp glowing after hours, or the faint whir of the IBM printer cranking out sheets of numbers that meant nothing and cost everything. Callisto Tanzi first learned the rhythms of commerce behind the counter of his father's Parma grocery, where Parmesan wheels were weighed on brass scales and coins landed with a clink soft enough to feel honest. By 1961, that modest shop had morphed into Parmalat, a gleaming symbol of Italian post-war ambition that promised shelf-stable milk to every corner of Europe. Tanzi's cherubic smile appeared on television spots beside snow-capped cartons, and grandmothers spoke his name with regional pride. To many Italians, the company was not merely a brand, it was breakfast itself. For decades later, on a fog-dampened December morning in 2003, 2 junior analysts inside Bank of America's London office clicked open an email marked urgent. Attached was a scanned confirmation letter, purportedly from their Cayman Islands branch, attesting that Parmalat held $3.95 billion in a single account. The analysts frowned. The formatting looked off, the reference number failed to match internal templates, and the signature block bore a surname no one recognized. They forwarded the file up the chain, curiosity edging toward alarm. While those doubts in London coiled, Tansy prepared for the annual Christmas toast at Parmalat headquarters, a glass and brick campus just south of Parma's medieval walls. In the atrium, employees gathered beside a towering tree adorned with miniature milk cartons as ornaments. Tansy stepped onto a small stage, voice warm, promising new horizons in Latin America and a soon-to-launch sports drink line. Few noticed his fingers trembling around the crystal flute. Across the Alps, at Milan's financial daily Il Sole 24 Ore, reporter Stefania Bianchi sifted through a stack of bond prospectuses. Parmalat had issued paper so frequently she half-joked the company should install its own printing press. Coupon rates were tempting, and Italian pension funds devoured them like biscotti. Yet Bianchi saw a puzzle. Despite years of bold acquisitions, yogurt plants in Hungary, orange groves in Brazil, the group declared itself flush with cash, boasting liquidity reserves higher than some national treasuries. She dialed an investment bank contact, murmured a question about leverage, and heard only a sigh on the other end. No one understands their pockets. Inside Parmalat's finance department, a small coterie of loyalists maintained what they called Il Gicetto, the little game. Fake invoices traveled between dozens of offshore shell companies with dairy-flavored names. Bonlat, Colonlat, Dairy Holdings Limited funds shuttled in dizzying loops, returns booked before euros ever arrived. Whenever auditors sought proof, Bonlat's supposed billions in the Caymans served as a magic eraser. A single spreadsheet, color-coded, password-locked, tracked the illusion. Its cells glowed green when numbers balanced and red when the web sagged under real-world pressure. Pressure mounted in early December when a $150 million bond came due. Banks expected payment in 5 days, but the Cayman's account, in truth, held less than a tourist pocket change. Tansy convened an emergency meeting with his chief financial officer, Fausto Tana, in a paneled office smelling faintly of espresso and panic. "We roll it over as always," Tansy insisted. Tana shook his head. Markets were skittish, rumor already swirling. Tansy's voice dropped to a whisper, "Then find the money inside, anywhere you must." Unable to conjure billions from thin air, Tana phoned Deloitte's audit partner Enrico Grassi, requesting a fresh confirmation letter for internal reconciliation. Grassi balked, citing protocol. Hours later, Parmalat faxed over the now infamous Bank of America document, hoping to silence questions. Instead, the forged letter detonated. By mid-December, Bank of America publicly declared the document a fake, and Italian prosecutors announced a criminal inquiry. Parmalat stock, once steady as sunrise, crumpled 70% in 2 trading sessions. Employees in Parma watched ticker screens with faces drained of color. Lorry drivers idled in the courtyard, unsure whether to continue deliveries. Supermarket managers across Italy stacked milk crates, wondering if customers would soon distrust every carton with the blue and white label. Yet many small investors refused to believe the worst. "Tansy is a family man," one elderly shareholder told a television crew, clutching her share certificate like a prayer book. "A man like that does not steal." The illusion collapsed 7 days before Christmas. At a televised press conference, the new turnaround manager Enrico Bondi adjusted his glasses and pronounced a single devastating sentence. "The cash on hand is approximately 38 million euros. Reporters stared, pens halted. The gap between reported liquidity and reality exceeded 14 billion. The largest hole Europe had ever seen in corporate accounts. Cameras immediately cut to images of empty milk aisles, as if the nation's breakfast had soured overnight. Tansy was arrested on December 27, bundled into a police van while snowflakes melted on his overcoat. Inside his villa, Carabinieri found Renaissance paintings, antique violins, and boxes of rare stamps, relics purchased with company funds, tucked away like heirlooms from a parallel life. Questioned under fluorescent lights, Tansy spoke softly of errors, of growth pursued a little too aggressively, but admitted forging nothing himself. Prosecutors later traced direct instructions in his handwriting. Bondi spent months untangling subsidiaries, untwisting sham transactions, comforting farmers who feared bankruptcy if milk tankers stopped collecting at dawn. Pensioners filled courtrooms clutching bond coupons they now knew were worthless. The Vatican, holder of 30 million in Parmalat debt, issued a measured statement of disappointment, a rare intersection of faith and forensic accounting. In 2010, Tanzi was sentenced to 18 years, later reduced on appeal. He emerged from the courthouse wan and diminished, walking past journalists without lifting his eyes. Tana and other executives received their own terms. The trial transcripts, thousands of pages long, revealed no ingenious algorithm, no esoteric derivative, just forged letters, circular money flows, and the oldest solvent of skepticism, charm. Long after the headlines faded, a pensioner named Lucia still bought Parmalat milk at her corner market. She inspected each carton carefully, more ritual than necessity, then placed it in her basket with a resigned nod. Fraud, she decided, was like a thin film atop heated milk. Invisible until it cools, then suddenly it wrinkles, collapses, and must be skimmed away. The milk beneath remains, but it never tastes quite the same again. A year later, on a spring afternoon, the village loudspeakers announced that Callisto Tanzi had died at 83. In Parma's cafes, conversation paused briefly, curiosity mixing with fatigue. Outside, delivery trucks in fresh orange livery rolled past, carrying milk from a restructured, humbled company that now balanced its books with vigilance. The city resumed its rhythm, yet somewhere in that rhythm lingered a faint cautionary echo, reminding all who heard it that even the purest looking glass can hide what isn't there at all. Elizabeth Holmes liked to keep the building cold enough that visitors tucked their hands into jacket sleeves while she walked the corridors of Theranos in rolled-up shirt sleeves, her voice a practiced hush. She was 29, statuesque, with a black turtleneck that had become its own marketing asset, and she promised that a single drop of blood could replace vials, needles, and laboratory waiting rooms forever. In Palo Alto coffee shops, young engineers quoted her like scripture, "Make it so people never have to say goodbye too soon." On the 6th floor of the company's glass headquarters, a demo room glimmered with polished chrome. There sat Edison, a shoebox-sized device that hummed with faint purpose whenever investors arrived. A lab technician named Erica Chung often stood behind a tinted partition feeding tiny cartridges into the machine. She knew that the cartridges worked only when preloaded with results generated by conventional analyzers hidden 2 floors below. Each time she closed the partition, she told herself the deception was temporary, a bridge to real science not yet invented. Across the country in Phoenix, 47-year-old pharmacist Richard Fewish opened the Wall Street Journal and read a glowing profile. Walgreens would soon install miniature Theranos labs in stores, offering on-the-spot diagnostics for flu, cholesterol, maybe even cancer markers. Fewish traced a finger over the newspaper's grainy photo of Holmes. He had once mentored her father at Enron. Now he muttered, "Too good, Elizabeth, too good." He tore the page out and slid it into a folder already thick with research notes. Inside Theranos, scientist Ian Gibbons shuffled along a dim hallway to Holmes's office, lab coat draped over one arm. He carried data showing that Edison's error rate soared when analyzing potassium and sodium, basic electrolytes. Holmes skimmed the chart, then fixed him with ice-blue eyes. "We're fine," she declared. "We have thousands of successful runs." Gibbons, gentle and bookish, left her office with shoulders sagging, the chart still clutched in his hand like a confession no one wished to hear. Walgreens executives flew in for a progress check that autumn. They were greeted by Ramesh Sunny Balwani, Theranos president and Holmes's secret partner. Balwani's smile was thin, his handshake forceful. In the demo room, Edison beeped obediently while a prearranged sample produced a flawless reading. Afterward, the visitors enjoyed pressed juice cocktails as Holmes explained that FDA approval was moving fast. The executives returned to Chicago dazzled. They greenlit a pilot program, 15 Arizona stores, then statewide. Not far away in Cupertino, medical device specialist John Carreru noticed an odd rumor. Theranos employed almost no pathologists qualified to validate lab diagnostics. He filed the detail away, suspecting a future story. Weeks later, an anonymous email arrived at the journal. "The blood boxes don't work. Patients at risk." The sender signed off as Allen. Carreru's pulse ticked up. He requested a meeting. Theranos headquarters bristled once whispers spread that the journal was sniffing around. Balwani convened an emergency war room. Lawyers drafted stern letters warning of trade secret theft. Employees were instructed to avoid contact with outsiders. Holmes recorded a company-wide voicemail: "We are changing the world, and change scares people. Stay focused." The voice, warm yet steely, floated through cubicles like incense. Meanwhile, Erica Chung handed in her badge, unable to stomach another sample rerouted to conventional machines while patients believed otherwise. She sent a quiet resignation email, then boarded a flight home to San Francisco, stomach knotted. Within days, Chung received a thick envelope from Theranos' legal team threatening litigation if she spoke of proprietary processes. She tucked the envelope in a desk drawer and tried to sleep, but dreams of needles snapping haunted her nights. Kariru, methodical, built a lattice of sources: engineers, lab techs, even a former board member mystified by Holmes's refusal to hold traditional audits. He traveled to Phoenix, where a nurse recounted a pregnant woman whose Theranos test flagged elevated HCG, triggering anguish until a hospital draw proved normal. The nurse's voice quivered: "False positives break hearts." Kariru felt the urgency sharpen. Inside Theranos, Lab Director Adam Rosendorf drafted a memo explaining that quality control failures might jeopardize patient safety. He placed it on Holmes's desk at 7:15 p.m., the office calm except for HVAC ducts murmuring overhead. At 11 p.m. the memo returned with a single notation in Holmes's handwriting: "Fixed." Nothing else. Rosendorf resigned the next day. September 2015 arrived with record heat in Silicon Valley, and the journal splashed Kariru's first expose across its front page. Hot startup Theranos has struggled with its blood test technology. Holmes scheduled emergency interviews on CNBC, PBS, then Fortune, staring down cameras with unblinking conviction. "The accuracy of our tests is unparalleled," she insisted. But FDA agents soon arrived unannounced, inspecting lab notebooks, seizing vials. Edison units were powered down, lined up like dormant toasters. Walgreens suspended in-store operations. Board members, including 2 former secretaries of state, demanded private briefings. Holmes convened them in a windowless room, delivering a slide deck of path to compliance charts. One director, a decorated Marine general, cleared his throat and asked, "Elizabeth, do we actually have a viable product?" Silence throbbed. Holmes's smile faltered for the first time. January 2016. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services issued a damning report citing immediate jeopardy to patient health. They barred Holmes from owning or operating a lab for 2 years. The once mythical valuation of $9 billion evaporated like dry ice. Engineers boxed prototypes, their labels curling from humidity. Some employees wandered the parking lot during lunch, staring at the hills, unable to fathom how swiftly promise had mutated into peril. 2 years later, federal prosecutors charged Holmes and Balwani with wire fraud. In the courtroom, the woman who once channeled Steve Jobs wore a pale blazer and spoke only to confirm her name. Witnesses described data massage, intimidation, flights on private jets to woo Rupert Murdoch's investment. The jury deliberated, then delivered 4 guilty counts. Holmes's gaze drifted downward. The black turtleneck was gone, replaced by a regulation cardigan that looked oddly fragile. On a cool evening not long after sentencing, Chung walked past a shuttered Walgreens lab kiosk. The glass display still bore a slogan in faded vinyl: "Tiny sample, big results." She paused, remembering the low whir of Edison and the sinking dread of numbers that lied. She whispered, "No more," and continued walking, the neon lights buzzing overhead like a cautionary hymn. When dawn broke over Singapore's Boat Quay, the city's glass towers reflected a tangerine sky, and Nick Leeson was already at his desk on the 17th floor of the Cimex Exchange building. He wore the navy jacket of Barings Bank, its red and gold crest stitched over his heart, and typed so quickly that colleagues joked his fingers belonged to an orchestra. Back in London, Barings, established in 1762, banker to queens and wars alike, regarded Leeson as a prodigy. 27, self-taught, minting millions from the exotic new realm of Nikkei futures. No one noticed that every keystroke carried something darker, like a rustle behind velvet curtains. Each afternoon Leeson strode across the trading pit, sleeves rolled, voice a clarion above the din. He bought and sold contracts tied to Japan's stock index, wagering on tiny pulses of price. When bets paid off, he flashed a thumbs up to supervisors peering through smoked glass. When they didn't, he simply nodded, pretending nothing had happened. The missing money slid into a secret ledger labeled 88888. Inside Baring's computer system, 5/8 looked harmless, just a memo line, a technical catch-all. In Leeson's hands it became a trapdoor, swallowing losses before anyone upstairs could feel the floor tilt. The first mistake, a modest miskeyed trade, cost about £10,000, easily hidden. But mistakes, he discovered, could be erased with double-down courage. He placed a larger wager, won, and the account evened out. The sensation felt electric. Fear transmuted to relief by sheer will. Soon the 5/8 account absorbed bigger errors, then purposeful gambles meant to recover the errors. It became, in Leeson's private language, the benevolent shadow. Every evening he faxed profit figures to London. Every evening he assured himself the shadow would shrink tomorrow. Baring's rewarded results. Executives flew in from Bishopsgate bearing champagne, praising the Singapore miracle. They never lingered long. The front office and the back office, normally divided to ensure checks and balances, were both run by Leeson. He wrote the trades and reconciled them, inspector and suspect in the same body. Auditors requested random spot checks. He supplied pre-printed forms and a smile. One auditor later recalled thinking, "He's so open he must be clean." Openness in this case was simply empty drawers. January 1995 arrived with the humid snap of monsoon season, and the Kobe earthquake ripped through Japan's economy. The Nikkei slumped. Leeson, terrified that earlier losses would surface, made a single colossal bet that the market would rebound quickly. He bought futures by the thousands, each contract a silent plea for gravity to reverse. The trading floor's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as screens bled red. Losses ballooned past £100 million, yet he faxed London a profit of £14 million, handwriting a cheerful note, "Steady as she goes." The 5/8 account groaned under the weight, but the trapdoor still held. In February, Baring's Treasury Department noticed unusual funding requests from Singapore. Leeson blamed margin requirements and signed off with brisk confidence. In truth, the gap had reached £500 million, larger than the bank's available capital. Sleep deserted him. He jogged the river at midnight, streetlights flickering off his sweat-damp shirt, rehearsing explanations that could never be spoken. Each morning he shaved, adjusted his tie, and re-entered the pit, an actor stepping onto a stage where the audience was blind. The revelation came not from a whistleblower but from arithmetic. Clearinghouses demanded cash Barings could not produce. A risk manager in London compared internal profit reports with external margin calls and felt his pulse spike. Phone lines hissed between continents. "Nick, what's going on?" a director asked. Leeson, staring at a sunrise he no longer admired, replied, "There's a problem, but I can fix it." Within hours he booked a flight, leaving a 3-word note on his desk. "I'm sorry." He slipped through Frankfurt, then on to Kuala Lumpur, passports stamped in quick succession like final heartbeats. The pursuit ended in a Frankfurt departure lounge where German police closed in, his Barings jacket replaced by a gray sweatshirt. As Leeson was escorted away, television screens overhead carried breaking news: Barings Bank insolvent. A 233-year-old institution, once strong enough to finance the Louisiana Purchase, was felled by a single employee and a string of digits. In London, stunned clerks packed belongings into cardboard boxes while journalists gathered on Bishopsgate, rain peppering their notepads. Pensioners holding gilt-edged bonds watched interviews with historians who spoke of Waterloo and Wellington, as if empire itself had cracked. The final loss stood at £827 million, double Baring's capital, handed to receivers for a ceremonial pound. At trial, Leeson confessed without theatrics. He described the 5/8 account as a hole that kept getting bigger the more I dug. The judge sentenced him to 6.5 years in Changi prison. There, dengue fever gnawed at his bones and fluorescent lights buzzed much like those on the trading floor, only colder. He read philosophy, kept a diary, and tried to map the moment where confidence had pivoted into ruin. The diary offered no clear answer, only sketches of mounting pressure and the seduction of one more chance. Baring's collapse reshaped risk controls worldwide. Banks split trading and settlement teams, installed real-time reconciliations, and taught new hires the parable of the 5/8. Still, Every generation needs its own reminder. A rogue trader is rarely a cartoon villain. More often he is the promising colleague who stays late to square the book, convinced tomorrow will grant forgiveness. On a quiet February morning years later, Leeson stood outside Dublin's grey stone High Court, newly released, cheeks gaunt but eyes steady. Reporters thrust microphones. "Do you regret it?" one asked. He paused, then offered a small, tired laugh. "Regret is easy," he said. "Understanding is harder." He turned, coat collar up against the wind, and disappeared into the city's traffic, the echo of 5/8 trailing like a cautionary whisper through every trading room that still believed speed could outrun scrutiny. Kenneth Lay's corner office on the 50th floor of Houston's Enron Center glimmered with river light, a silver ribbon winding south toward Galveston. Visitors sat across from him, hypnotized by the view while he spoke of a future where gas flowed like data. Efficient, instantaneous, profitable each time it changed hands. They left believing Enron wasn't merely an energy company, it was the operating system of commerce itself. 3 floors below, a slender accountant named Sharon Watkins studied a spreadsheet whose sums refused to settle. The line item was called Raptors, a friendly nickname masking hundreds of millions in obligations tucked inside partnerships with whimsical names. LJM, Chuco, Whitewind. The cells glowed green, yet the cash behind them seemed to hover like mirage water over hot asphalt. Watkins printed the file, circled 2 columns, and slipped the pages into her bag, unease spreading through her chest like slow ink. That same evening, CFO Andrew Fastow led bankers from Chase and Merrill through a private tour of Enron's trading floor. Rows of curved monitors displayed real-time prices for electricity, bandwidth, even weather futures. Traders in headsets barked buy or sell orders as if conducting invisible orchestras. Fastow pointed to a wall of graphs climbing steadily upward. "Volatility is opportunity," he told the bankers, voice smooth as oiled gears. The bankers nodded, their own bonuses already mapping themselves in the mind. Weeks later, journalist Bethany McLean dialed Enron's investor relations hotline from a cramped cubicle at Fortune magazine. She had one simple question: how exactly does Enron make its money? The spokesman's answer wandered through jargon, arbitrage capture, regulatory optimization, without ever landing. McLean hung up, eyebrows knitting. She opened Enron's latest 10K filing. Footnotes sprawled for pages, a thicket of entities blooming offshore. She began marking them with sticky flags, pink for partnerships, yellow for guarantees, blue for anything that simply felt odd. The document soon resembled a bedraggled peacock. Inside Enron, optimism remained choreographed. Lay announced a new headquarters, 2 glass towers to be christened Enron 2. Employees cheered. In the cafeteria, posters urged them to buy company stock for retirement. Each paycheck saw more shares funneled into 401k plans. One engineer joked that diversifying in Houston meant owning Enron and living in an Enron power department. Laughter followed, comfortable, trusting. Sharon Watkins did not laugh. She drafted an anonymous memo to Lay titled, "Potential Accounting Irregularities," 8 pages long, plain language, urgent tone. She slid it under his door at dawn, then walked to her desk feeling both weightless and doomed. Lay read the memo that afternoon. He forwarded it to Enron's law firm with a note, "Please handle." No reply reached Watkins. Autumn 2001 arrived like a furnace door opening. California's rolling blackouts dominated headlines, and skeptical analysts began probing whether Enron's trading strategies had amplified the crisis. Short sellers circled. One, Jim Chanos, compared Enron's cash flow against reported profit and saw a canyon between them. He described it to clients as a skyscraper of smoke. Positions were taken. Whispers gained volume. On October 16th, Enron announced a surprise $618 million quarterly loss. The conference call had the hush of a stalled elevator. Fastow did not appear. CEO Jeff Skilling, famously combative, resigned for personal reasons. Analysts, once charmed by his swagger, sensed fear beneath the brittle courtesy of the call's closing minutes. The next morning, Arthur Anderson auditors arrived to collect shredding bins that had filled overnight. Inside the bins lay drafts of partnership agreements, side letters, even post-it notes reminding managers which numbers to re-optimize. A junior auditor watched the confetti swirl into plastic bags and wondered whether paper could truly forget. Bethany McLean's story hit newsstands with the title, Is Enron overpriced? Investors who once quoted Lay at cocktail parties now quoted her article, tone shifting from admiration to unease. Enron's share price began a steady slide. $90, $70, $50. Employees stared at overhead tickers as if watching a beloved relative age in real time. Watkins, summoned at last, sat before the board. She answered questions under fluorescent glare. Were the Raptors real hedges? Were profits recycled through the partnerships? She spoke calmly, hands folded, yet her voice wavered when she described a balance sheet walking on stilts. Directors thanked her and adjourned for private session. In that session, one member reportedly sighed, "We've flown too close to the sun." By November, Enron needed fresh credit to survive the week. Lay called JP Morgan's chief risk officer. The line crackled with static and hesitation. Credit rating agencies convened emergency committees and within 48 hours marked Enron as junk. The downgrade triggered debt covenants like rows of collapsing dominoes. Cash evaporated. Employees evacuated their savings plans, only to discover trading windows were locked. The cafeteria posters remained, ghostly encouragements to buy more. Payphones in the lobby filled with staff calling spouses, voices tight, saying words they never thought they'd need, "We might lose it all." December 2, 2001. Enron filed for Chapter 11, the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history at that moment. Morning commuters on Louisiana Street passed picketers holding handmade signs. "Enron stole my pension," while reporters adjusted camera angles to frame the crumbling logo above the revolving doors. In a rented Houston ballroom, Lay addressed several hundred stunned employees. He spoke of cycles and resilience, but the microphone clicked off mid-sentence, "Batteries dead." Silence settled, heavy as Gulf humidity. Someone in the back whispered, "It's over." People began to drift out, some carrying boxes, others carrying nothing at all. Federal agents moved quickly. Fasto was indicted on counts of fraud and money laundering. He arrived for booking with a resigned half-smile, as if caught in a magic trick gone sour. Skilling surrendered months later, defiant, declaring, "I am innocent," to the sea of flashes. Lay, sunburned and tired, spent his final months awaiting trial at his Galveston beach house, waves lapping indifferently. Sharon Watkins testified before Congress. Her memo entered into the public record. Lawmakers praised her courage, though she felt no triumph, only the nagging thought that earlier courage might have saved thousands of retirees. In living rooms across America, viewers heard a new term, mark to market, and tasted the bitterness of trusting where transparency lacked. The skyscraper itself still rises over Houston, now occupied by other firms, windows gleaming in afternoon light. Tour guides sometimes point and mention Enron, voice dropping a note, as if speaking of a storm whose clouds are long gone yet whose lessons still darken the ground. Frauds, they say, rarely begin with outright lies. They begin with small stories people tell themselves to keep celebrating quarter after quarter, until the stories demand a physics of their own. And physics, unmoved by charisma or tangerine sunrises, eventually calls every story home. Sam Bankman-Fried's workday in Nassau began barefoot. He padded across the marble floor of the $40 million penthouse that overlooked Goodman's Bay, hair tousled like a C student late for class, and settled into a gaming chair ringed by half-empty cans of Diet Coke. On the screen glowed the dashboard of FTX, a cryptocurrency exchange that claimed to process billions each day, an ocean of digital coins moving at light speed. Outside, palms swayed in the trade wind. Inside, Sam's fingers danced across the keyboard, reallocating customer deposits as casually as a gamer shifting loot between avatars. FTX's origin story had played well in venture capital boardrooms. Sam, an MIT physics grad turned Wall Street quant, said he'd spotted tiny inefficiencies in global Bitcoin prices and spun them into a fortune through a trading firm called Alameda Research. He wore cargo shorts to billion-dollar pitch meetings, mumbled through risk models, and punctuated sentences with "it." Investors found it charming, a sign, they thought, of genius uncorrupted by polish. They poured money in until FTX's valuation swelled past $32 billion, making Sam at 30 the newest oracle of finance. 3,000 miles away in New Jersey, a schoolteacher named Denise Ruiz downloaded the FTX app after seeing a Super Bowl ad in which comedian Larry David scoffed at crypto, only to be labeled the guy who missed out. Denise deposited her $15,000 emergency fund, comforted by FTX's slogan, "Built by traders for traders." The interface showed a neat balance, a soothing palette of blues and oranges. Denise's husband asked if it was safe. She replied, "They have Major League Baseball umpires wearing their logo. How risky could it be?" In Washington, D.C., policy staffer Tina Powers reviewed a briefing on the surge of crypto lobbying. FTX topped the donor list, mostly through Sam's personal checks and a constellation of entities with names that blurred together, guarding against pandemics, building a stronger future. Tina highlighted a sentence, "FTX does not rehypothecate customer assets." She wasn't sure what that meant, but it seemed reassuring. Back in Nassau, a more complex reality pulsed beneath the pastel branding. When Alameda's high-frequency trades soured in early 2022, crypto winter, some called it, Sam instructed lieutenants to tap an internal backdoor that transferred billions in customer funds from FTX to Alameda without triggering compliance flags. The bridge ledger bore an innocuous tag, tier_lending. Caroline Ellison, Alameda's CEO and Sam's on-again, off-again partner, watched the numbers appear on her screen and exhaled. She hedged the loans with risky tokens minted by smaller startups, many of them partially owned by FTX itself. If prices rebounded, the whole would vanish, like footprints erased by a returning tide. Prices did not rebound. Bitcoin halved, then halved again. The hole widened to 8 billion. Still, Sam toured Capitol Hill, testifying about effective altruism and the need for smart regulation. Senators posed for selfies. Reporters wrote profiles titled, "The Next Warren Buffett?" Sam promised he would one day give away 99% of his wealth. No one asked if that wealth actually existed. On November 2, 2022, journalist Ian Allison of CoinDesk published a quiet bombshell. Alameda's balance sheet was unusually heavy with FTT, a token created by FTX itself. The implication was circular, an empire propped up by chips it had minted in-house. Binance CEO Changpeng Zhao, Sam's larger-than-life rival, tweeted that Binance would liquidate its FTT holdings due to recent revelations. The tweet landed like a match in dry grass. Withdrawals slammed FTX within hours. Denise in New Jersey watched her app display processing longer than usual. On Twitter, users posted screenshots of stalled transfers, each accompanied by a rising tide emoji. In Nassau, FTX employees refreshed internal dashboards and saw red bars inching toward zero. Sam paced the penthouse barefoot path he'd worn into the carpet, phone pressed to his ear, pleading with investors for a bridge loan. Most calls ended quickly. One replied, "Sam, is the money really there?" The line went dead. FTX froze withdrawals on November 8. Denise's balance still showed $14,782.54, but the withdraw button was grayed out. She reread the Super Bowl slogan, "Don't miss out," and felt nausea bloom. Binance issued a non-binding letter of intent to bail FTX out, then walked away after 24 hours of due diligence. The gap was too vast, the books too chaotic. By November 11, FTX filed for bankruptcy in Delaware. The new CEO, John J. Ray III, veteran of Enron's dismantling, issued a statement, "Never in my career have I seen such complete failure of corporate controls." Auditors found expense claims for Bahamas condos labeled company culture, invoices for private jets carrying Amazon packages from Miami, and Slack messages authorizing million-dollar transfers with emojis. Federal agents moved fast. Caroline Ellison and FTX co-founder Gary Wang quietly pled guilty, agreeing to cooperate. Sam was arrested at his apartment, his t-shirt mismatched to pajama bottoms, gaming mouse still glowing on the desk. Extradited to New York, he faced charges of wire fraud, securities fraud, and campaign finance violations. In court, he shifted from foot to foot as prosecutors described how customer deposits funded venture investments, political donations, and a web of affiliated loans. He pleaded not guilty. His mop of hair hung over eyes that flicked toward the jury and away again. Denise Ruiz attended a creditor meeting via Zoom. The administrator projected a pie chart showing recoverable assets at perhaps 10 cents on the dollar, depending on litigation. Denise muted the call and stared at the gray withdraw button still frozen on her phone. Outside her window, early snow dusted the playground where her children chased each other in heavy coats. She wondered how to explain to them that grown-ups sometimes build castles made of sand, bright and enticing, only a screen tap away. When the trial opened in fall 2023, spectators lined up before dawn. Sam took the stand, claiming, "I never intended to defraud anyone," but cross-examination revealed chat logs in which he dismissed regulatory concerns with a three-letter expletive. The jury needed barely 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The Nassau penthouse now sits empty, sea breeze whistling through sliding doors that once framed a tech utopia. Plastic bottles rattle along the balcony. Tourboat captains point and say, "That's where the crypto king lived." Their voices equal parts awe and warning. Fraud, the case reminds, can flourish in sunshine, amid palm trees and philanthropic promises, until one journalist asks a simple balance sheet question and the tide drains away, leaving footprints that refuse to vanish.